Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku was the Leviathan that killed 32 people? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Tsukachi Naomasa rubs tired circles into his forehead, staring at the flickering computer screen with a mixture of exhaustion and bitter acceptance. The monitor displays a number of websites, all restating the same information in different formats. They've been following Razorback for at least a month now, yet there's still absolutely no information on the villain. None at all. It's mindlessly frustrating, but Naomasa has to admit that whoever this is knows what he's doing. He opens yet another webpage. This one is slid carelessly into the top right corner of the screen and has a condensed, organized look to it. It's probably some sort of non-profit, Naomasa assumes. His eyes scrunch up at the corners as he forces his tired eyes to focus on the information present, although he's doubtful he'll found anything new. Razorback, the website states. Status, villain. Quirk, the ability to grow spines of an unknown material from anywhere on the skin. These spines can be removed or forcibly expelled with no damage to the host. It's a rather mundane quirk, really, compared to some of the others. Naomasa's genuinely impressed that someone with such an ability has managed to carve out such a name for himself. Then again, it's relatively easy to carve something out with piercing spines and a butcher's knife. Razorback has taken 7 lives in the past month, yet his motives are strangely unknown. That might be the most frustrating part. Naomasa huffs. Villains who are on some sort of self-righteous killing spree and announce their reason for doing so usually inadvertently make it easier for the police and heroes to predict their next victims and set up traps accordingly. Either Razorback knows this and is purposely being quiet about it, or he's just killing without rhyme or reason. Naomasa isn't quite sure which is worse. He groans and presses his palms into his eyes, his chair squeaking and rolling backwards. This isn't getting anywhere. He's just going to end up frustrated, and frustration won't get him anywhere. He's about to call it quits and turn in for the night when God himself intervenes, and his phone dings noisily. The noise is enough to drag him out of his tired stupor, and he unlocks his phone. 11:34 Tsunagu, we have reports of a hostage situation nearby. It's been requested that you accompany me and assist in negotiations. 11:34 Tsunagu, sending you the location now. Naomasa frowns, brow creasing into wrinkled lines. He types in a "be there in 10, before hastily tidying up his workspace and turning off the lights of the office. He's the last one there, not an unusual occurrence in the slightest, but still tedious. A repetitive pounding sound reaches his ears, and he opens the front door of the office to find the dark world being soaked in a furious downpour. He can barely hear himself think over the deafening roar of the raindrops splattering on the street, and he can't help the groan that crawls out of his throat. It's going to be a very long night. He pulls on his trench coat and smooths down his hair before fastening on his hat, opting to go for a dead sprint through the rain. He shuts the door behind him, lingering in the shadowy underpass for a second before sprinting out into the rain. His boots splash noisily on the ground, and the rain is like a sledgehammer on his back. He almost falls under the force and wonders absent-mindedly if it's the effect of some overpowered quirk. He figures it's not. He almost slips a few times but manages to make it to his car, absolutely drenched and shivering. His hands shake slightly as he starts the car, and he settles for venting his former frustration into flipping off the rain through the car window. The headlights flare to life, illuminating a million tiny specks rushing past in white sparks. Already tired of the sound of the rain hammering on the roof, he turns on the radio and pulls out. It's nothing short of a miracle that he manages to make it to the location Best Jeanist sent him reasonably on time. Traffic is a nightmare, and Naomasa spends most of the ride focusing intently on whatever news is playing at the moment. By the time he gets there, the situation has considerably worsened. The villain, who Naomasa has been told is nothing more than a teen in possession of some sort of helicopter blade quirk, has grown increasingly frustrated and has begun making threats. Naomasa takes a back road or two and manages to make decent time. He doesn't bother trying to avoid the rain at this point. He's going to get soaked either way, so he just ignores it bitterly as he runs to where a crowd has clustered around a narrow alley. He spots Best Jeanist at the front of the mob and shoulders his way through the cluster of people, eyes trained on the alley. As soon as he stumbles to a stop next to the pro hero, he's already talking. "How's the situation looking?" "See for yourself," Best Jeanist answers grimly, mouth pressed into a thin line. Naomasa presses one hand to his forehead like a visor and attempts to squint through the rain pummeling him from all sides. He can make out the fuzzy image of what appears to be a teen with massive propeller-type blades instead of hands. They're hunched over and appear to be yelling furiously, although Naomasa can't hear them above the noise. In their grip trembles the hostage, a tiny child. They can't be older than 4, Naomasa realizes with a start. He can make out wide eyes and a mop of rain-soaked hair. They're shaking, and Naomasa jolts when his eyes land on the razor-sharp propeller blade pressed against the child's throat. "Oh my god. Tsunago, why didn't you tell me that the hostage was a child?" he asks, hands curling into tight fists. Part of him wants to rush in and save the kid himself, but it's not his place. He would most likely only end up making the situation worse. He doesn't get a response, and based off of Best Jeanist's expression, he doesn't think he's going to get one. He swallows, mouth feeling dry, and turns back towards the scene. What are his demands? He wants a gun and some sort of transportation away from here with the promise that he won't be followed, Best Jeanist answers. My guess is that he's just some sort of petty crook acting out of desperation. Naomasa bites back a bitter remark, tongue burning with words as cold as ice. He swallows them, eyes narrowing slightly. We clearly can't engage directly. He has too tight of a hold on the kid. One slip up, and he bites his lip. We also, however, can't afford to let him go unpunished. We're aware of the limitations. Midnight has been sent to try and sneak in from behind and knock him out, but we are unaware how the rain will affect her quirk. Of course. The DM in rain. Naomasa curses under his breath. Just then, the propeller villain takes the opportunity to speak. "Clock's ticking, heroes." He sneers, tone full of desperation. Naomasa's not sure how he manages to hear it above the rain, but he does. Choose. This brat's life or my arrest. To prove his point, he presses the blade further. Even from here, Naomasa can see the way the kid goes deathly still and the beginnings of a red stain. "Tsunago, we need to go now dash." He never gets to finish that, because all of a sudden the night lights up in a blinding flash of green and an explosion of dust and smoke. Naomasa's pushed backwards by the force of the blast, although he doesn't lose his footing. His eyes snap to Best Jeanist's, hoping desperately that this was some plan of his, but there's no recognition in the hero's eyes. Uncertainty and fear claw at Naomasa's gut, and he turns back to the flickering cloud. That's when he hears it. There's a horrible, shrill scream that starts out high-pitched and slowly warps into a bellowing, inhuman roar. It's deafening, like the roar of a jet taking off but amplified 100-fold. Naomasa presses his hands to his ears, squinting through the rain. What the hell is going on? The question is quickly answered when the smoke dissipates in the rain. There are a few bright flashes of electric green that light up the alley with a sickly radioactive light, before something crawls into view. Naomasa's heart immediately lunges into his throat, and he can hear his pulse pounding in his ears like the wing beats of a startled bird. The thing is massive, easily close to the size of the buildings it's next to. It's impossible to make out details in the downpour, but he can see a massive mouth filled with glittering teeth the size of his arm. The creature is curling upwards like it's swimming through the air, curling in lazy spirals towards the sky as if gravity doesn't exist. He spots 6 legs kicking and pushing at nothing, each tipped with curved claws. Glistening in the green light. Massive fins spread out all over its body, from its back and head, and a tangled wet mane blankets the back of its head and runs all the way down its spine to the tip of its long, swishing tail. Suddenly, the creature halts in its ascent and bends over, moving as if in slow motion. Piercing green eyes glowing like neon lights land on the crowd, and the beast PPS and snaps its head wildly. Its many legs go from leisurely treading the air to kicking and clawing at a frenzied pace, and the beast unhinges its jaw to its maximum potential and roars. No, it's not a roar. It's a horrible, gut-wrenching, ear-splitting scream. The frozen quiet that had been suspended over the crowd of spectators abruptly shatters like broken glass as people around him wail and shout, desperately trying to escape. Naomasa can only watch in mute horror as the beast swings its head from side to side as if looking for something, screaming again and again. Then, in one clean sweep, it twists in midair like a coiled spring and slams its fin-tipped tail into the nearest building, smashing through it in a cloud of smoke and debris. Naomasa lunges out of the way as chunks of brick and cement start raining down in clusters, looking around for shelter from what he fears might soon become an unstoppable rampage. He spots an alcove across the street and moves to sprint towards it, but is stopped by yet another scream that sends ice shooting through his veins and freezes him in place. The creature swoops over his head, close enough for him to touch and knocking him over just by the force of the action alone, and smashes into the buildings across the street. Its eyes are wild as it thrashes and claws at anything and everything. Every now and then it will disappear into the smoke, only to emerge in a flash of green lightning and a piercing scream. From his position sprawled on the ground, hands and sleeves soaked, Naomasa has an unobstructed view of the creature swooping and shrieking, destroying anything it touches like a horrible disease. He feels almost sick. Where had the thing come from? What was it? Was it a quirk? His radio buzzes and fizzles from where it is clipped onto his pocket, and he fumbles for it with one hand while trying to keep the rain out of his eyes. This is Tsuragami. He hears a staticky voice on the other end bark. What the hell is happening down there? Naomasa presses down on the button and prepared to respond but cringes as he's cut off by yet another twisted scream. As soon as it fades, he holds the radio close to his mouth and tries to shield it from the rain. The alley that the hostage situation was in suddenly exploded and this thing came out. He chokes out for lack of anything better to describe it as, eyes blinking furiously as rain pounds on his back. It's some sort of floating serpent the size of a building. It appears to be crazed and is currently going on a destructive rampage. Extensive damage. Extremely. He hears Tsuragami bark something indistinct before there comes a more crisp, "We're on our way." The radio then dissolves back into static. Naomasa jams it in his pocket, staggering to his feet and straining his eyes to catch sight of the creature in the distance. It's left a sickening trail of destruction the likes of which he's never seen before, even in all his time as the chief detective of the police. The amount of destroyed buildings and smoke hurts, and he's not sure if he wants to see it in the light of day. His attention is abruptly captured when, quite suddenly, there's silence. The creature is gone, Naomasa realizes. Vanished into thin air. The only sign that it was ever here is the trail of shattered buildings and dust that it left. Naomasa stares, wide-eyed, his breathing coming in heavy puffs that turn to smoke in the flickering light of a bent streetlight. That's where he stays, alone on the street in the pouring rain, until the rest of the police force arrives. They search for months, but nothing is ever heard or seen of the creature dubbed Leviathan ever again. There was nothing and there is nothing. No registered quirks to date are even slightly similar to what he saw that night. Eventually, they give up, hoping that the Leviathan's debut was a one-time occurrence only. Naomasa should have known that he wouldn't be that lucky. Izuku wakes up to the sun shining on his face in blinding bands, and he squints and groans. Swatting at the light like a cat does nothing to ease his predicament, and he eventually settles for sitting up. His head is still groggy with sleep, and he shakes his head to clear it and looks around. Clothes are strewn about in the floor in crinkled heaps, and the wall is covered in dozens of posters. All Might mostly. Who can blame him? All in all, the room is tight and dusty and calming, and Izuku spares himself a minute to just bask in it. And then the minute is over, and Izuku pushes himself out of the bed with a sigh, resisting the urge to hurl himself back in as he's greeted with an unpleasant wave of cold. Nope. Can't do that. As tempting as the thought is, he can't be late to school again. Izuku pulls on his uniform and heads into the bathroom, picking up the toothbrush off the counter. He pipes a thick dollop of toothpaste onto it and jams it into his mouth, brushing a bit slower than usual. While he's at it, he takes the opportunity to examine himself in the mirror, checking himself up and down. He feels relaxed, but his body, no, his quirk, doesn't always agree. This time, however, it seems to have calmed down and isn't displaying any of the usual accessories that come with any sort of emotional agitation. Izuku's honestly pretty relieved to not have the beginnings of a spinal fin trying to sprout from his back and tear a hole in his uniform again. It's been a while since he's been relaxed enough to not let any of the Leviathan slip through the cracks and make itself known on his body. He raises his eyebrows at himself in the mirror and laughs at how stupid he looks before rinsing off his toothbrush and heading downstairs. The kitchen is warmer than his bedroom, which comes as a bit of a relief. He's not sure if it's just him or if it's thanks to his quirk, but his room always feels absolutely frigid. It drives him insane. "Morning, Mom," he says with a soft smile as he grabs a piece of toast off a plate, not even bothering to sit down. She clearly hadn't heard him coming and spins around, wide-eyed. "Oh, Izuku, honey, you scared me," she breaths with a laugh, and he can't help but wince a little. As soon as he does, he feels his feet shift a little bit, and claws try to wiggle their way to the surface. In one quick practiced motion, he squashes the emotion, and the sensation fades. It's nothing, he half tells himself and half tells the Leviathan, even if he isn't sure if it can hear him. His mom was easily spooked, but most mornings he remembered to make some sort of noise to indicate his presence. "Sorry, Mom," he says awkwardly. She rolls her eyes and pats his head with a huff. "No need to be sorry. Now sit down and eat before you're late for school." Izuku does as she requested, eating quickly as his mom sits down across from him. Midoriya Inko is a small woman with the same dark green hair as Izuku and a dazzling smile. She's sweet and understanding and everything in between, and Izuku would do anything for her. The meal passes in relative silence. It's normal. This isn't a tight, empty silence. This silence is calm and comforting, a wordless conversation between mother and son that passes between like the breeze on a summer day. Having finished up, Izuku grabs his bag from where it was loosely hanging by one strap on a chair and slings it over his shoulder, stretching. "All right, Mom, I'm gonna head out. See you later," he says, opening the door with a satisfying click. The knob is worn and familiar under his hands, slightly scratched from days when the Leviathan had managed to push claws onto him for one reason or another. He's glad today's not one of those days. "Bye, honey. Stay safe," she called after him. Izuku smiled and pushed open the door, immediately buffeted by an unruly gust of icy wind. "Don't let the cold in," he hears from the kitchen, and he can't help but laugh to himself a little bit as he shuts the door. The cold swirls all around him, whistling and puffing in a quiet melody. Izuku blinks as it bites at his eyes, but shakes away whatever emotions that might bring. He doesn't need to sprout fins from his head just because he's a bit chilly. Just as he thinks that, he feels a faint prickling at the back of his head. Izuku rolls his eyes so hard they almost go back into his head and tries to convey, "What did I literally just say?" directly to his quirk. It doesn't work, and if anything only speeds up the process. Izuku's frustration only grows with his inability to stop the blue-green fins from sprouting out of his head like sails, and they respond by growing faster. That's why Izuku shows up to school, face slumped in resignation, with two sets of frilly fins poking out from his hair that look like someone took a pair of scissors to the edges of them. His eyes are habitually trained on the floor as he enters the classroom and sets his bag down next to his chair, but that's not enough to avoid the piercing gaze he immediately feels once he does. "Oi, Deku, what's up with the fans?" Katsuki barks, tone begging for a response. Izuku's gut instinctively tries to clench up in fear, but he shuts it down just as quickly. He's been dealing with this for years. There's no need to be afraid. "Hey, you useless brat. I'm talking to you," he hears again. He responds by wordlessly sliding into his seat and training his eyes on the board, taking care to wipe any and all emotion off of his face and slip it into his pocket for later. He can feel the stare on his head growing increasingly infuriated even from here, and he mentally sighs and prepares for the worst. Sure enough, not even a few seconds later, A pale hand slams down on his desk and is immediately accompanied by a few crackling explosions. It's not enough to actually damage the desk, but it will leave soot everywhere that will stain all of Izuku's physical classwork black. Oi, you deaf? Those ugly but fans kill your hearing. He hears, although he wishes that the fins did negate his hearing. It would save him from having to deal with this bullshit again. He continues to stare at the wall ahead of him, hoping that the bell will ring soon and drag Katsuki away from him. Katsuki, now undoubtedly said, grabs one of Izuku's upper fins and yanks hard. It sends a spike of pain shooting through his head and down his spine, but Izuku manages to lean into the pull a bit to negate the damage. All the while, he keeps a bored, indifferent expression on his face. He's not sure how much of it is to put off Katsuki, and how much of it is to keep the Leviathan from trying to manifest. At least it appears to be working a bit. Katsuki growls wordlessly, face contorted into raw anger. One hand snaps out, locking around Izuku's jaw and twisting his head painfully so that they're looking each other in the eyes. "I'm talking to you, you good-for-nothing lizard," he spits, teeth gritting together. Izuku feels his own mouth shift and knows without seeing that his own teeth are sharpening and twisting. Preparing. He forces whatever emotion is causing it out, before raising his eyebrows at Katsuki and stating flatly, "Peace off." Katsuki looks like Izuku just said in his drink. "What the f did you just say to me?" "You heard me," Izuku responds just as monotonously, probably going to earn a beating later for his actions. He's taken enough by now that it doesn't faze him. Katsuki draws back a glowing red fist, and Izuku wonders if he's going to throw the first punch then and there, but the teacher picks that moment to open the door and stroll to his desk, eyes immediately scouring for and finding Katsuki. As expected, he does nothing about the actual situation and simply clears his throat. "To your seats, please," he says, and his voice is low and disinterested. Katsuki hisses and draws a finger across his throat as he leaves, and Izuku ignores him. They're choosing their futures today, Izuku registers somewhere. He's not actually listening, instead far more focused on whatever his head's locked onto at this point. He doesn't expect any attention. Ever since the incident 10 years ago, when he used his quirk for the first time and subsequently killed 32 people, he's made a point of keeping his quirk ambiguous and unnoticeable. He's doing a pretty good job, actually. Most, if not all of his classmates think that his quirk is just some kind of flamboyant body modification that's not actually useful for anything, and he'd like to keep it that way. Nonetheless, the fins annoy him to no end because they're just too similar to the fins of the Leviathan that had been caked in blood and dirt on that infamous day, and if someone makes the connection. In his agitation, he barely notices Katsuki challenge the teacher over something stupid, like grouping him in with the rest, or whatever, or the way his hands thicken and curl into claws. "You're trying out for UA, aren't you, Katsuki?" he hears the teacher ask. There are a few startled gasps and murmurs that follow, but Izuku isn't really sure why they're surprised. "Hell yeah, I am. Even aced the mock exam they set up. You all can bet your butts that by the time we're out of school, I'm gonna be a better hero than All Might himself." The rest of the class is in awe of his confidence. Izuku wishes he would quiet down. Come to think of it, isn't Midoriya trying for UA as well? Izuku has never wanted to disappear more than he did in that moment. He settles for fixing the teacher with a poisonous stare as the room's attention slowly but surely switches to him, like a targeting system locking on. There's silence for a moment, and then the class bursts into mocking laughter. Frilly little Izuku? No way! He hears among the cackling. He'll get killed in the exam. He only shrugs, not bothering to fight back. It'll be over soon, and then they'll all forgot about it, and he can leave. He doesn't know why they care, anyways. And then, over the noise, he hears a familiar, threatening growl. Deku! A split second later, Izuku is pushed backwards by the sheer force of Kaken slamming his hand onto his desk. "How dare you claim that you're on the same level as me, you worthless brat!" He spits the words like Izuku had said he was going to UA to purposely infuriate him, and Izuku swears he can see smoke coming out of the other boy's ears. It wouldn't be surprising. "When did I ever claim anything?" he asks flatly. This earns him an explosion to the face, searing his nose and cheeks as he grits his teeth and does his best not to respond. His quirk grants him somewhat of a temperature resilience to both cold and heat, but even that's not enough when he's being blasted from 3 inches away. Listen, Deku. You're just an ugly, weak scarecrow with a failure of a quirk. You could never be a hero. How dare you try to compete with the likes of me? I'm not trying to compete with you, Kaken, Izuku says. The exam is impossible for someone like you, Kaken snarls. Don't waste my time. I'm not wasting anyone's time. You're the one up in my face. If you ask me, I think you're the one wasting mine. The class falls uncharacteristically silent, and Izuku knows without a doubt that he's crossed a line. He can't bring himself to care, really. He just keeps on throwing out emotions as soon as they appear and tries to prevent claws on his feet from poking through. After a short while, however, the silence becomes unbearable, and he sighs and turns to look at Katsuki. He's smiling, like this is some big game and he's just won the grand prize. Izuku supposes, in a way, that he's more or less handed Katsuki a good reason to beat the sheet out of him on a silver platter. Too late to take it back now. We'll see who's a waste of time when you're wasting away on the ground, Deku, Katsuki croons, crossing the room to slide back into his chair with more elegance that he's normally capable of. Izuku almost responds with, great. Looking forward to it. But he saves that kind of direct sarcasm for after school. The day passes in an unremarkable blur after that. Most days do, really, when the only thing he has to look forward to is an after-school beating. Today's especially hazy considering that he's fully aware that today's butt-kicking is going to be extra painful. Why can't he just keep his mouth shut and stay out of trouble for once? With an impressive lack of finality, the last bell rings, and Izuku starts packing his bag. Unsurprisingly, he doesn't get far, and the worn yellow backpack is ripped out of his hands and flung onto the floor. So you really think you're on my level, huh? Katsuki sneers, suddenly mere inches away from his face. Izuku wants to say that he didn't imply anything of the sort, but bites his tongue and instead gives Katsuki a bored look. I guess I'll just have to teach you what my level looks like then. He senses the punch before he sees it. His quirk is reptilian in its nature, and he's particularly susceptible to heat signatures. Katsuki's habit of warming up his hands before swinging makes it almost laughably easy to step out of the way, which he does. Katsuki stumbles a step, but has already pivoted and swung his leg in a wide arc into the back of Izuku's knees. He visibly grimaces and a few blotchy scales appear on his arms, but he doesn't buckle. He simply walks forward, reaching down to pick his bag. Katsuki predictably uses this opportunity to jump on his back and grind his face into the tile of the classroom floor. Izuku grits his teeth, wincing when a particularly sharp canine that was definitely not there before scrapes against his lip. His emotions are beginning to slip from his grasp. He needs to reel it in before Katsuki can figure out that he's not as weak as he's led everyone to believe or, God forbid, connect the dots and realize that Izuku is a horrible creature and a murderer and a monster. Katsuki's smart, Izuku will give him that, but not even he's smart enough to connect the two pieces with the lack of hints Izuku's left. This calms him down a touch, and he hears his teeth squeak as they shrink a bit closer to what normal teeth should look like. He lets himself go limp and still, his face smashed uncomfortably against the cold tile. There's silence, and then he feels a sneaker carefully nudge him. He doesn't respond. Fucking coward, couldn't even take one hit. He hears Katsuki gloat, before there's a telltale zipping noise and a bark of laughter. Hero analysis for the future. Number 13. The last bit sounds almost incredulous. Like hell he's gonna need this. Besides, I'm sure he won't miss one little nerdy book if he has 12 more. Goddamn. He hears a popping, and then a crackling, and the smoky smell of burnt paper fills his nose. It takes all of his self-control not to jump up and let the Leviathan go wild for a bit, and all he does is lie there motionless on the ground while months of work go up in flickering flames. He hears laughter, then the click of a lock, and Katsuki tosses the book out the window like it's worth absolutely nothing. Honestly, if he had any brain at all, he would have thrown himself off of a bridge or something a long time ago, Katsuki says flatly. There's more laughter and then, finally, they leave. Izuku counts to 15, just to be sure, before groaning and letting himself get off of the floor. His nose aches faintly where it's been smushed into the ground for the past 5 or 10 minutes, but he ignores it and all but stumbles to the window. He peers out and sure enough, there's his book. It's drifting serenely on top of the small pond on the school's campus, drenched and waterlogged where it isn't coal black. Izuku's hands shake from where he's clutching the window frame, and he's aware of his own breathing as his senses slowly but surely become more refined. His arms and legs prickle as their muscle mass increases slightly and they're coated with a layer of dark, almost black teal scales. 2 thin fins start to poke through his lower back, one on either side. At the same time, his movements become ever so slightly further away, somehow as if he's not the one controlling his own body, but is merely a spectator. Izuku growls, and the inhuman snarl that leaves his throat is more than enough to get him to immediately close off his frustrations. He's losing control. He can't lose control, not here. He closes his eyes and breathes. The Leviathan's attributes slowly but surely disappear, scales vanishing back into his skin and fins curling back towards him until there's nothing left. Once they're all gone, he lets out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He's back in control. Izuku huffs and grabs his backpack off of the ground as he leaves the classroom, heading down the hallway and out the door. Once outside, he circles back around to the back where the fountain is. The book is probably demolished, but it won't hurt to check to see if anything's salvageable. Surprisingly, most of it is. Katsuki's explosions only really burnt the cover and the first few pages. The rest of it's uncomfortably wet and will most likely dry into a wrinkly mess, but there's minimal ink bleeding and most of his notes are still legible. To him at least. Izuku lets out a bitter sigh of relief as he tries to squeeze a bit of the water out. It doesn't do much, but he still holds onto the book like a lifeline as he makes his way off campus. The walk home isn't a long one, but his wet hands are shivering by the time he's hardly halfway there. He knows it's because his hands are still wet from the pond, but that's not going to stop him from being bitter around it. He opts to hold the soggy book in one hand and tuck the other into the collar of his uniform, squeaking when his cold hand touches his collarbone. He's so caught up in this that he almost doesn't hear the muddy, frothing voice echoing around him as he passes through the underpass. Keyword, almost. Well, how convenient. Hope you don't mind if I borrow your skin, kid. Someone gurgles, and suddenly he's surrounded in a thick, goopy liquid the color of vomit. It's churning and twisting and Izuku inhales sharply, alive. It's the sludge villain. The one from the news. Just his luck. It doesn't take long for Izuku to realize that he could very easily die here. Sheet! He yells, eyes going wide as the first sparks of fear begin to take root in his chest. Help! Oh. None of that, thank you kindly. The villain cuts him off, and suddenly, something is flowing down his throat and up his nose and oh my god, the sludge villain is trying to get inside him. That's when Izuku's tight hold on just chest loosens, and the fear he's been restraining rushes in like Arctic water. He starts flailing and kicking, doing his best to scream despite the ooze muffling him. His brain starts to fill with fear and adrenaline, and he can already feel the Leviathan twisting inside him as it makes itself known. Almost there. It'll be easier if you don't struggle. He hears. Izuku's lungs burn, and he tries to breathe desperately. He succeeds in inhaling a bucketful of villain slime and desperately tries to cough it up to no avail. His struggling began to fade as his vision blinked in and out. Oh god, it wasn't supposed to end like this, it wasn't supposed to end like this. Suddenly he feels a roar rumble to life deep inside of him, and it's not the slime villain he's afraid of anymore. He tries to suppress it, to fight, but his strength is gone. If he's going to survive this, he doesn't have a choice. He feels his quirk flare to life before it shows, but when it does, it moves faster than it ever has before. In seconds, he's covered in scales, and fins burst from his back and his head. His teeth grow into fangs, and his hands and feet curl into claws. A finned tail bursts from his spine, swishing and swaying and sending up dirty clouds with each slide. The more it progresses, the more Izuku's aware that he's losing himself, but he grits his teeth and fights it. It's like trying to hold onto sand as it drains through his fingers, but he's not going to quit. He's not going to lose control. What the hell? What kind of dash? The Leviathan hears, but Izuku forces himself to pay no mind. On instinct, he opens his jaw as wide as it will go, and the slime villain eagerly rushes to cram themselves in. Instead, however, Izuku lets out a horrific, twisted scream that's far louder than anything something of his size should have been able to produce. The force alone sends the slime villain flying out of its would-be host in a spray of ooze, eyes wide as they splatter across the ground. Holy, what the hell are you? Izuku drops to all fours, eyes glowing a bright radioactive green. His fingers are clenched white-knuckled as he can feel his strength being sapped. His gaze is fading as his control loosens. The slime villain is crawling away, eyes narrowed accusingly. Izuku turns to stare at it, breathing heavily, and it gurgles something equivalent to a curse. He can't last much longer. "Howdy dare you assault me?" he growls, and it comes out much lower and rougher than it should. He tries to make it sound braver than he feels. "What the hell are you?" The slime villain gurgles. That urge overcomes him again, and Izuku opens his jaws and screams once more, paralyzing the offender in their place before stalking forward on broken, puny limbs not made for walking like this. A noise catches its attention, however, and his fins flare outward. "Who dash?" he forces out, trying to stand, but something smashes into the ground at the entrance of the underpass, and he hears a bellowing cry. Texas smash. A blast of wind sends both Izuku and the slime villain flying, rolling to a stop. In a blur of color, the newcomer rushes forward and scoops the slime villain up, ignoring their furious screams. They then turn towards Izuku, and without wanting to, he snarls. His eyes won't focus right, and he can't figure out who the figure is or where he is. He's hanging on by threads at this point. It's a miracle he's still in somewhat of a control at all. "Don't go near it." The slime villain screams. I tried to possess some kid and they turned into that thing. It's not human." Izuku's breath stutters as his gut twists and he squeezes his eyes shut. "They're right. He isn't human. He's a monster." A hand presses against his back, and Izuku's eyes snap open wide. The Leviathan thrashes at the sudden touch, and he lurches back like he's been burned, shaking. He can feel his tail hitting the ground, but it doesn't feel like it's his. The last grains of sand are running through his fingers. "Young man," the figure says, and he's taken aback by how low and calming their voice is. He grits his teeth and clutches at the ground, breathing heavily and forcing himself to be still. "Damn it. Don't," he tries to warn them, but his voice comes out in a gravelly, inhuman growl. No. "Can you look at me?" He forces his eyes upward, ignoring the way the ground is swimming and rolling. The figure is standing above him, crouched. They seem familiar, but he doesn't know why. "Can you breathe?" "Breathing? Yeah, he can do that. It'll be hard, but..." He forces himself to SCK in a deep breath, and then let it out. Another, then another. The panic recedes from his system, and the Leviathan slowly but surely begins to wither. As soon as it weakens even a little bit, he reaches in, grabs on, and takes back control. His vision goes a frothy white and he's dimly aware of his eyes rolling up into his head as he smacks into the pavement. Izuku opens his eyes only to be immediately assaulted by a wave of pain so overwhelming that he almost vomits, eyes going wide. He can't breathe. No, that's not right. He can breathe. He could always breathe, but the Leviathan is... The Leviathan. Just what? Izuku raises his hands and flexes them. They move at his command. He's in control, and his hands are perfectly human. He gasps, wrapping his arms around himself, shaking. The Leviathan was almost in control. He survived the attack, but the Leviathan was almost in control. He's never been that close without losing it entirely. He looks around, eyes wide, for the destruction, but there is none. What? He whispers to himself, gazing at the untouched stones. It's okay. He didn't do anything, just defended himself. He was still in control. Oh, thank God. Izuku half sobs, covering his eyes with his hands and sinking to the ground. "Young man," an oddly familiar voice asks, and Izuku is suddenly very aware that he is not alone. The figure. They're still here. Are you okay? He jolts like he's been slapped, scrambling away from the voice. Who is it? What did they see? His horror triples to the point where his tail reforms to cover his face when he realizes the person who saw him was no one other than literal All Might himself. He's staring, wide-eyed and shaking, and more parts of the Leviathan are appearing. No, this can't happen, he needs to calm down. Whoa there. I didn't mean to startle you. Are you all right? Izuku squeezes his eyes shut, inhales, and exhales. The Leviathan fades. What happened? He asked. He's dimly aware of fighting off the slime villain before All Might shows up and almost losing control then and there, but it's foggy and grainy, like he's watching it through an old-school film reel. I believe you were attacked by this here slime villain who managed to evade my grasp earlier. Sorry about that. No, I know that. What? You appeared to be some sort of frilled reptilian humanoid. Is that your quirk? That was it. That was all I saw, yes. Izuku only very narrowly avoids thanking whatever god there is right then and there, and just gives him a stiff, jerky nod. He didn't recognize the true Leviathan. He doesn't know. Thank you for, saving me. Just doing my job. All Might stands up. Glad to see you're okay. You were acting pretty strange there towards the end. Izuku stiffens and his heart skips a beat, but All Might doesn't seem to notice. That's a pretty impressive quirk you've got there as well. With some practice controlling it, you could make a fine hero, you know. Izuku blinks, eyes wide. He can be a hero? All Might thinks that he can. All Might doesn't know what he is, or what he's done. He smiles, but it feels forced. Thank you very much. He stops before shyly adding. Can I get your autograph? Already done. All Might winks, and then he's gone, and Izuku's left to drop the facade and hyperventilate until he's borderline on Leviathan territory once again. It takes him at least a solid 10 minutes to pull himself together. He almost let the Leviathan take control. He was so close. Literal All Might showed up and saw himself almost become the Leviathan. What would he have done if he knew? But All Might didn't realize, and it's okay. It's okay. The sun's going down, he realizes, and he forces himself to stand on shaky legs. His book is on the ground in the corner, and he picks it up and clutches it like a lifeline, white-knuckled. He needs to get home. His mom's probably worried sick. Heads out of the underpass a bit faster than he usually walks, but he doesn't want to be there. It reeks of the Leviathan's scream and the slime villain's gunk, and he worries that if he stays there any longer, he'll snap. He takes one of the more crowded roads this time, hoping the sheer number of people will bring him some sense of anonymity. It does, and it's incredibly calming. No one pays him any mind here. They're all too focused in their own little worlds. There's less people around as he walks further, which he doesn't really worry about. It's getting darker. There's bound to be less people. That's when he notices the crowd of people all clustered around an alley on the opposite side of the street. There's smoke rising from it in massive billowing clouds, and the sheer amount of noise coming from the spot suggests a villain attack. Izuku's brain screeches at him to ignore it and keep walking, but before he knows what he's doing, he's crossed the street and is fighting his way to the front of the crowd. There's heroes everywhere, but none of them seem to be intervening with the situation. Most are trying to combat the growing fires or just working crowd control. He twists and turns, trying desperately to see around the people around him, the heroes ushering them back, but he manages to catch a glimpse. His world broils and shatters. Katsuki isn't having a great day. It had picked up a little bit after he watched that shitty useless nerd lying on the floor and burned his useless notebook, but then it went straight back to not great. Actually, screw not great. It went to hell. He'd been walking with a few of his annoying lackeys, talking about something unimportant while the two practically kissed the ground he was walking on. They agreed with whatever he said, but he didn't care and just kept on talking. And then, in a crash and a cloud of smoke, this guy had appeared in their path. Katsuki hadn't paid him much mind at first. He looked like just any other court citizen. He was tall and lean, with short cropped hair and a bit of stubble, eyes hidden behind flashing sunglasses. His mouth had been creased into a frown, which had suddenly and ominously vanished when Katsuki had felt the man's eyes fall on him. "Hey kid," he'd asked, swaggering towards Katsuki like he owned the place, which was enough to earn a few crackling sparks on its own. "You training to be a pro hero someday?" "You bet your butt." Katsuki hadn't been able to help but smirk as he moved to shove past the man and maybe, accidentally, shoulder him a bit. Perfect, he'd heard, and in a blur of sound and motion, he'd found himself at the end of the alley with a very large, very sharp blade pressed to his throat. That's where he is now, eyes wide and hands clenched at the way the stranger was chuckling. "What the F?" he hisses, only to be cut off by his own throat. Contracting with a choking noise, traitor, as the blade is pressed just a bit closer to his quivering throat. "Please, do spare me the chatter," the man says, having the audacity to sound bored of all things. Katsuki does his best to spit and pretty much fails miserably, but doesn't let any of the sheer rage he's currently housing slip from his gaze. "Jesus, you're a feisty one, aren't ya?" the man hums. "Tell you what. We've got a bit of time, for the big boys get here and I can get to business. Guess I can entertain you for a bit. What's your name, kid?" "Go to hell." "Nice to meet you, go to hell. You can call me Blade." He laughs. "Man, I thought I had the edgiest name, but looks like I got one-upped by some blondie from downtown. Got any siblings, maybe named PSS off, or exit the vicinity?" Katsuki manages a set-off garbled noise, torn between shouting every bit of profanity he knows at this guy and not answering him. He fails at both, and it's infuriating. Blade nods thoughtfully as if Katsuki had just given him a plain answer. "That's what I thought. What's your quirk, go to hell?" And Katsuki thought getting called Kakin was annoying. "Scald none of your effing business," he snarls, eyes narrowed. Once again, the man takes it without question. "None of your effing business, huh? Seems like a weird title for a child's quirk. What's it do?" Katsuki has no idea if this guy's trying to be funny or if he's actually just that much of an idiot. Exactly what it says on the tin, fuckstick. "Tieske. I told you it's Blade. Not a lot going on upstairs for you, is there, go to hell? I hope you choke." "Unlikely. Now, you've probably figured out mine by now, so I'm not going to bother explaining it." Katsuki's eyes narrow a bit, and he looks down. There's still a long blade being forced against his throat, but this time his eyes follow it. The blade is attached at the base to 3 others, protruding from under the man's jacket where a hand should be. It looks like some sort of fan blade, Katsuki thinks numbly. Fantastic. Impressive, ain't it? Blade croons, and Katsuki hopes he burns in hell. Just then he hears the sound of sirens and yelling, and 2 pro heroes stop at the far end of the alley, backed by a few cop cars worth of policemen. This is Kamui Woods, Death Arms, and the Muzutafu Police Department. You are in violation of multiple laws, including public quirk usage and hostage-taking. Please stand down. Someone yells. "Oh, finally," Blade sighs. Was beginning to think they wouldn't show. Looks like they just couldn't help but come save the poor little pro hero in the making from mean old me. He laughs, and Katsuki can't wait to watch this dude rot and maybe take a PSS on his grave. "No thanks." Blade calls, this time addressing the heroes directly. "Really, boys? We all know I didn't kidnap a poor, innocent child for sheets and giggles. You didn't even stop to hear my demands." He clicks his tongue. "Unprofessional." "Very well," a single voice says, and a figure Katsuki doesn't recognize steps out from the crowd. He's dressed in a simple trench coat fluttering in the wind and a hat, and from what Katsuki can see, his face is calm and composed. "What are your demands?" "Oh, it's him," Katsuki hears the man mutter to himself before he murmurs. "What do I want?" Katsuki's pretty sure that despite the act, the villain knows exactly what he wants and is just toying with everyone here for kicks or something. How does 1,700,000 yen and transport out of this city sound? The negotiator seems to consider this for a bit. 1,700,000 yen, you say? That's quite the sum you're asking. If you don't mind me wondering, what do you intend to do with that money? To Katsuki's surprise, Blade only laughs in response. "Trying that trick again, HM? Really, Tsukachi? I'd have thought that by now you'd learned not to underestimate me. So this isn't the negotiator's, Tsukachi's, first rodeo, but it isn't Blade's either. The conversation between them continues for a bit longer, Katsuki feeling the blade press closer and closer to his throat. He wants to thrash and scream and slug this guy until he stops breathing, but he knows that even the slightest movement would end up with an unfortunate shade of red on the ground. His attention is captured by Blade's tired sigh, and he straightens up and forces Katsuki to do the same. Tsukachi, I truly enjoy these little chats, but I have a schedule to meet. I suggest you meet my demands, or we might end up with some unfortunate casualties. Katsuki's eyes blaze. Unfortunate The blade is now definitely pressed against his throat, drawing a thin line of red across his skin. Kaken morbidly feels like he's a canvas being painted on by an artisan. An artisan who specializes in blood. Do you ever shut up? Blade mutters, looking down his nose at him. Really? It was rather amusing at first, but now dash. That's when they hear it. A sound rips through the air, twisting and writhing its way across the alley and clawing its way into Katsuki's ears. He can't describe it, but if he tried, he'd probably settle for saying it's something similar to a mixture of nails on a chalkboard and a horrible roar, stretched tightly into an ear-splitting scream. The noise fills his ears and blankets his head with flickering noise. He feels like he's underwater. Everything's muffled, his ears are ringing, he can't see, he can't move, and he can't breathe. What is this? Out of the corner of his frozen vision, he manages to lock onto the sight of a similarly paralyzed Tsukachi, whose face is contorted into something akin to recognition and horror. Katsuki is hit by the realization that whatever just happened is somehow much worse than his previous situation. Great. He's only just entertained the thought when a green and black blur flashes across his vision, lunging over him. Just as suddenly, he can breathe, and the blade around his neck is gone. He stumbles to the ground, one hand coming up to rub at his neck where it stings. It comes away coated with shiny red. His brow furrows, and his mouth parts slightly as he turns to see what exactly just happened. The scene before him is not what he expected to see. Blade is on the defense, hair windswept and jacket askew. He's bleeding from a horrid, ragged gash across his collarbone, and his breathing is shaky and labored. Where his blades had once been still, they now spin wildly, a deadly sharp circular blur that reminds Katsuki of a particularly murderous ceiling fan. His sunglasses are gone, eyes wide, and Katsuki swears he can see terror swirling within them. He's about to ask what just happened, as if Blade's going to answer, when that question as well is answered when that same blur lunges from the shadows with a frothy, guttural roar. It's not human, Katsuki realizes with a sinking feeling in his stomach. His first reaction is to jump in and join whatever it is in beating the sheet out of Blade, but even he knows that getting involved right now is a bad idea, with a capital B. Blade looks so much different than he did before. The cocky, relaxed villain that had only just held Katsuki captive is gone. In his place is a narrow-eyed man who's trying too hard to defend himself from all sides as the thing bounces and ricochets off of walls like a pinball, swiping and slashing and roaring. Katsuki catches a glimpse of a frilly tail splattered with blood as it swings through the air and hits Blade's face with a deafening crack. Blade, however, is somehow mostly unfazed and takes the opportunity to slash at his attacker. There's a horrific, pained screech that does not sound human in the slightest, and Katsuki thinks he's going to be sick. This isn't like him. He shouldn't be afraid, damn it. Whatever this is shouldn't scare him. But it does. A glance behind him proves he's not the only one. Everyone, citizens, policemen, and pro-heroes alike, is frozen in silent horror, not wanting to move and risk attracting that thing. No one moves to help Blade. No one moves to run. Katsuki thinks that the dead stillness is scarier than whatever's behind him. He turns back just in time to see Blade land one more solid hit on what's most likely the thing's head. The creature crumples like soggy cardboard, landing with a thunk in a tangle of limbs. Blades, stop spinning for a second, and the tips are coated in blood. Katsuki can't help but feel pity for the thing as it squirms and convulses on the ground like some sort of disgusting organ, keening and hissing in pain. Blade looks conflicted, but a second later his propellers start spinning again, and he raises them above his head. Blade is fast, but the thing is faster. In the blink of an eye, it cracks its tail into Blade's stomach, scrambles to its feet, and disappears up and over the building behind it. Just like that, the spell is broken. The pro-heroes are moving towards him, people are running and scrambling away, and the police are taking notes, but Katsuki's just standing there. The rest of the night passes in a dull blur. Katsuki's dimly aware of being carted away from the scene. He barely listens as the pro-heroes check him for injuries, patching up his neck while telling him how brave he was. He's definitely more focused on Blade, who's uncharacteristically quiet as he's arrested and loaded into the police car, which means he doesn't miss the quick, grim look that the villain and the Tsukachi guy share. Yeah, something is definitely up. The heroes hovering over him only let up for a second, but it's long enough for him to spring up and make his way over to Tsukachi, ignoring the surprised and commanding yells from behind him. Tsukachi doesn't see him at first, but Katsuki plants himself firmly in the policeman's path and makes direct eye contact. Try ignoring him now, Beach. What? He hisses. The F was that? Tsukachi blinks at him owlishly as if to say, who is this lost child and why is he questioning me, but ends up only biting his lip and turning away. Katsuki isn't going to take that for an answer. He skids into Tsukachi's path again, this time undeniably startling him. Don't think I'm dumb, old man. I saw that look you gave ceiling fan fucker. You know something. You can fool them but you can't fool me. What the F was that? For a second, Tsukachi almost looks impressed, but then his eyes go dark and he looks away. Bad news, he says quietly, and that's the last Katsuki gets out of him before being dragged off by two frustrated pro-heroes. Now, what's your name, kid? We're gonna need to call your parents? Izuku wakes up in the middle of God knows where, and the first thing he feels is pain. It's surrounding him, drenching every molecule of his body in agony. It's like he's been dissected, and all of his organs and veins have been replaced with magma and hot rocks. Izuku's hands scrabble for a hold he can't find, yet he somehow manages to flip over and empty the contents of his stomach onto the ground. He stays there for a while, shaking and heaving while bile drips from his lips, filling his mouth with a bitter, acidic taste. It's after a few minutes of this that the smell starts getting to him, and he forces himself through the pain that racks his small frame and stands. This doesn't work, as his legs shake and buckle, and he promptly gets a face full of sand. Sand? No effing way. Yes, way, the universe says, and Izuku looks up and is greeted by the beach. It's the same one, his mind blankly notes. Of course it is. For a second, Izuku's 4 years old. He's scared and shaking because the big man with sword hands tried to hurt him, and then there was smoke and cold and pain, and now he's here on the beach and everything hurts and he just wants his mom, and he forces himself to SCK in a breath, hands clenching around fistfuls of sand. He's not 4 anymore. He's not alone and afraid and probably responsible for at least a few deaths. Actually, he can cross that last one out, he thinks to himself bitterly. His limbs are still shaking but the pain has subsided a bit. Well, not subsided really. More of relocated to a few specific areas. One is, unfortunately, his face, and the other is his arm. He reaches out tentatively and brushes a spot just above the bridge of his nose, only to hiss and recoil sharply when a bolt of pain springs from the touch and scurries across his body in a fizzled ripple. His fingers are dripping with a dull crimson, and he's suddenly very aware of the fact that he can taste iron on his lips. He takes a deep breath and looks around. The beach is the same one he woke up at after it happened so long ago, but at the same time, so different. It's covered from horizon to horizon in mountains of trash, containing everything from tires to entire fridges, all scrapped and abandoned. Izuku can't help but wrinkle his nose, immediately regretting it when his face flares up in pain, but it seems that this trash will serve its purpose. He half walks, half stumbles across the sand, feet dragging awkwardly like he's never walked on them before. The beach is dark, but the full moon lights it up like a spotlight, blanketing the area in a ghostly glow. He's dimly aware of the crash of the waves against the shore as he limps towards a shiny, almost glowing sheet of scrap metal. Sure enough, When he stands over it, he can see his reflection clear as day. He suddenly wishes he couldn't. His face looks like it's been cleaved in two. A thin but deep slash, oozing the same blood that's splattered and smeared across his whole face, runs from above his left eye, down over the bridge of his nose, and ends under his right eye. He stares, a strangled noise escaping his throat as a few drops of blood slide down his nose and splash on the metal in neat red droplets. He's never going to be able to cover this up. He's going to show up to school, and everyone's going to look at him, and they're going to know. Izuku feels the panic rising in him, feels the Leviathan churning to meet it, and he crushes it. There's no use in panicking. Panicking won't get him anywhere. In his few years of his anything but quirkless, torturous existence, that's one thing he can say he's learned. He doesn't know what happened. He never remembers. He can only hope that no one saw him. What about Katsuki? He doesn't matter. He's probably fine. Izuku had felt the way the Leviathan had reared in his chest and screeched at the sight of the villain who started it all on that fateful day years ago, and he hadn't been able to stop it, but he'd known that it would go for that man and only for that man. Izuku can't help but hope that the Leviathan hadn't killed him. He forces the thoughts out of his mind and opts to focus on the other source of pain, the one on his arm. He grits his teeth and peels the tattered remnants of his uniform off from where they're stuck to his blood-soaked arm, ignoring the sting and scorch of pain as he does. After a few long moments, he succeeds, letting the now unattached sleeve drop to the ground with a wet noise. It makes his stomach roll, and for once, he's glad he doesn't have anything to throw up. The rest of the top part of his uniform soon follows. He forces himself to look in the makeshift mirror again, this time pinning his attention on his forearm. The angle's weird, but he manages to peer over his shoulder at the wound. If he thought the scratch on his face was bad, this had to be hell. The gash is deep, 3 serrated marks like ragged claws tear up his back from the back of his shoulder down to the center of his waist, caked in dirt and sand and leftover shreds of fabric. It oozes a fountain of thick, dark blood, and Izuku's no doctor, but he knows that if he doesn't get a doctor within minutes he's probably going to die. But if he gets a doctor, they'll take one look at him and one look at the news, and probably just let him die. He isn't sure if he'd rather just bleed out here than face that. Besides, he knows his mom can't afford a doctor's appointment, let alone whatever surgery he'd be forced to undergo to try and save his life. Even if he wanted to survive, well, Izuku's head is beginning to feel oddly light, and he rubs at it a bit before slowly sinking to the ground. His back falls against the cold junk metal and stings like hell, but he finds that he can't bring himself to care. His vision begins to swim, heaps and piles of trash floating aimlessly across a black, starless sky. It's almost calming in its own way, and he can't ignore the way a contented sigh escapes his lips. The blackness is almost comforting as it rushes up to meet him. "You've got to be kidding me, Sansa," Naomasa says, resting his head in his hands. It feels heavier than usual, and frankly, he wouldn't be surprised if it was. They're back in his office and are supposed to be filling out paperwork regarding Blade and his crimes, but he can't shake his attention from what he saw. From the looks of it, neither can Sansa. I guess I figured that it had to come back sometime. It didn't make sense for something like that to just show up one time and then never again, the cat officer sighs, rubbing his face with one hand. He looks at Naomasa from his spot resting against the wall, eyes heavy and mouth curled into a frown. At least it was smaller this time. That's another detail Naomasa doesn't quite get. He has no doubt that what he saw was the Leviathan. There's only one thing that he knows of that can scream like that, but it was different. It wasn't the massive, serpentine monster he'd seen before. Why was it different this time? He's certainly not complaining, but I guess the question is, why now? Sansa asks, stopping his train of thought before it runs itself off the tracks. It attacked Blade before, correct? Naomasa thinks out loud, rubbing at his chin. It clearly has some sort of vendetta against him. I understand that, sir. My question is, by no means is this the first hostage situation Blade has been involved in or responsible for. Why didn't it appear at any of the others? Naomasa doesn't have an answer. He doesn't have any answers if he's telling the truth, and it's exhausting. What information do we have on the Leviathan? He asks, leaning off of the desk and turning to look at Sansa. In the flat, flickering white light of the office, the cat looks almost ghostly, and Naomasa can see he's not the only one who's tired. Almost nothing, remember? The closest thing we have to a visual is a blurry image or two, the cat replies, sinking down the wall a bit further. Naomasa remembers, but it doesn't hurt to ask. He bites back a sigh and turns back to the stack of paperwork on his desk. Well, let's finish this up, and then we can put some resources into getting what information we can into finding out who or what the Leviathan is. Izuku's not sure what's more surprising. The fact that he wakes up in what appears to be a bed, or the fact that he wakes up at all. Frankly, he's not quite sure if he's dead and heaven is just some sort of weird white room. It's painfully plain. All of the walls are unblemished, pristinely white, and the floor is made of shiny tile. A window on the far end is covered partially by a pale blue curtains, and light is flooding in from where it's not. The whole place smells like rubbing alcohol and vinegar, and Izuku isn't sure if he likes it. His arm feels weird and puffy, and he looks to his left to see a number of what appear to be IVs and other drips poking into it. He moves it experimentally, carefully noting the lack of scales or claws, before looking over. His other arm is bandaged tightly to the point where he can barely move it. He's not complaining, really, because he quickly discovers that attempting to do so hurts like hell. The forehand moves slowly up and brushes his face, coming into contact with a number of bandages and wraps covering his face. He blinks. He's in a hospital. His first reaction is to jump up and panic, but doing that won't do any good. He needs to stay calm. He needs to figure out how he got here and how much the staff know. He takes a deep breath, emptying himself of the panic and fear and worry and replacing it with a blank impassiveness. He doesn't know where he is or what happened, but showing resemblance to the Leviathan is definitely not a good idea. Not now, not ever, really. The door slowly opens, and he can't help but flinch as someone who's most likely a nurse peeks in. Her eyes meet his, and she scurries over with a quiet, "Oh, you're awake." She starts doing something with the 4 bags, and Izuku takes the opportunity to steel himself and get some answers. "Where am I?" "Muzutafu General Hospital," she answers, not looking up to meet his gaze. "You were in quite the condition, young man. I'm rather surprised that you're up so soon." "So soon? How long has it been?" "You've been under for 3 days, I believe." Izuku barely holds back a surprised shout, eyes snapping open wide. 3 days? Where's his mom? Is she okay? Don't panic. It's okay. How did I get here? She looks thoughtful for a second, before giving a light huff. "A young man brought you in. Said he found you on the beach and to call if you woke up." She pauses. "Actually, would you like me to call him?" Izuku has absolutely no idea who she's talking about. He doesn't have any friends, and none of his classmates would bother trying to help him. Maybe that's why he slowly nods, trying not to let his face betray his confusion. "I'm going to send in the doctor, too, and he's going to ask you some questions. Do you think you can answer them?" He nods slowly. "Questions? Do they not know who he is?" He can use that to his advantage, then. If they don't know who he is, they can't see his quirk and connect him to the Leviathan. It's a long shot, but he'll take anything he can get. She gives him a soft smile before leaving the room, closing the door behind her. Izuku takes the brief silence to figure out what he's going to say. He's been lying his whole life. He can do this. He just can't let them know what his quirk really is. What are they going to do when they realize he can't pay? What's he going to do? He tries not to think about it. Carefully, he strings together a story that he thinks will work. He's not Midoriya Izuku. He's Kuroki Hayashi, an orphan living on the beach. Hopefully, they won't be able to track him from just that. Hoping is all he can do. No sooner than he's done it, the door opens and a man in a white coat steps in. He has dark, curly hair and a soft smile ringed with stubble. There are bags under his eyes, but they're mostly hidden. "Good morning, young man. How are you feeling?" "Alive," Izuku shrugs before he can help himself. It's the truth. His body's mostly numb, anyways, and whatever feelings he had before are gone. but he says it with too little emotion. He's got to put on a good performance if he's going to get out of this without consequences. He forces an expression of trepidation onto his face, hoping the doctor doesn't catch it. The doctor lets out a slight puff of air that Izuku takes to be a laugh before pulling up a chair. He has a notepad in his hand, and Izuku knows that he's here to question him. My name is Dr. Shigetaka. What's yours? Keikuroki Hayashi, sir. Thank you for saving me. The man nods thoughtfully, scribbling something down on the paper. You're quite welcome, Kuroki. He rests the notepad on his knee before looking up at Izuku, gaze tinged with curiosity. Your injuries were quite extensive when you arrived. You were suffering from multiple lacerations and deep flesh wounds, as well as blood loss. Would you mind explaining how you attained these? Izuku nods, opting to twist the truth a little. Yes, sir. I was walking on the beach when a man showed up and attacked me. I don't know who he was, but he had, blades for hands, I think? Or something like that. And he tried to get me to go with him somewhere, but I punched him in the nose and he got mad. He cut me up with his hands, and I can't really remember much after that. The stutter and fear in his voice is something he left behind a long time ago, but he calls on it to help his performance. He's not Izuku, who's used to mind-bending fear and the knowledge that there's undoubtedly a price on his head. He's poor, orphan Kuroki, who's been attacked by a mysterious villain. If he spoke with his usual trained indifference, it would raise suspicion. Blades for hands, you say? Dr. Shigetaka says pensively, wrinkling his brows a bit. Izuku nods. The doctor sets down the pad again and pulls out a phone from his pocket, typing something that Izuku can't see. A moment later, he turns the phone around to show a mugshot of the man that started it all. The way Izuku's breath catches isn't acting. At least they caught the guy. Is this him? Dr. Shigetaka asks, and Izuku nods furiously. Why, yes, sir. That's him. Shigetaka hums thoughtfully, eyes narrowing a touch, before he puts his phone back and writes something else down on the sheet. Okay, Kuroki. Do you have parents or a guardian we can call to come answer for the rest? Izuku does his best to look like the question is painful, and squeezes his voice. No. Shigetaka raises an eyebrow. I'm sorry. And my mom and dad died a while ago. I live on the beach. This certainly gets his attention, and Izuku's suddenly very aware that there's no turning back. He's now waist-deep in his lie. What is he going to do once they're done with him? They'll try and put him in the system or a foster home, no doubt. He's got to get out before then. But how is he going to escape a hospital unnoticed? Wow, he really didn't think this one through, did he? Dr. Shigetaka mutters something else before standing up, smiling faintly, although now it's definitely more forced. Alright then. I believe that's all, Kuroki. Thank you for your compliance. Now, I think you have a friend who's here to see you. He waves as he leaves. For a minute, the room is quiet, yet Izuku feels choked. A friend who wants to see him? Who could that possibly be? The door opens and Izuku blinks. It's definitely not anyone he's ever seen before, he'll say that much. The boy that steps into his room is tall and wiry, with tan skin not unlike Izuku's. He has a head of pepper-gray hair that covers the upper half of his face and could rival Izuku's in messiness, uninhibited by things such as physics or gravity. What's uncovered of his face is mostly taken up by the huge circular glasses perched on his nose and his wide, toothy grin. Beach kid. You're up. He says in an accent Izuku doesn't recognize, practically springing over to the side of the bed. Izuku blinks, overwhelmed by the sheer energy in the movement. Beach kid? Is that him? It makes sense, seeing as whoever this is most likely found him bleeding out on a beach, but he's not quite sure how that makes him feel. Yeah, I am. He gulps, feeling gray eyes trained on him. Sorry, do I know you? Gray hair ponders this for a second, index finger tapping on his chin, before shrugging. Well, technically no, but seeing as I saved your butt, I think you should. He taps one hand on the side of his head before curling his fingers into a gun. The name's Okayoida Aki, but you can call me Bit, if you want. Izuku stares as he slowly waves with his good hand, trying not to look as awkward as he feels. He fails. Nice to meet you, Bit. Bit grins, and Izuku is painfully confused as to who this kid is or why he'd like to be called Bit of all things. Before he's even aware of it, Bit's talking again. I've seen that face before. I call myself Bit because I make things out of bits and baubles I find. It's like my legacy. He winks, and Izuku can't help but laugh a bit at how seriously he says it. He goes to respond, then pauses, staring at Bit curiously and chewing on his lip. Bit meets his gaze, raising an eyebrow. Yeah. Why? Izuku blurts before he can stop himself. Why what? You found me on the beach, right? Yeah. You were pretty effed up, not gonna lie. I thought you were dead. Izuku's not sure what to say to that, so he just asks his question. Then why'd you bring me here? Bit stares at him like he's just asked if the sky was green. Because you were literally dying. Alone on a beach in the middle of the night? What else would I have done with you? He says it so incredulously that Izuku has to remind himself that most people in real life don't look down on him as a stupid, mumbling nerd with a useless quirk. That's Katsuki's influence. It feels strange to think about. Sorry, I'm just not used to. Never mind, he tries to say without sounding pathetic. But lets out a garbled noise. Are you implying that the people you hang out with would have let you die? If we're talking about Katsuki, he might have been the one to finish me off, really. You hesitated. That's effed up, dude. Izuku really has no idea how to respond to any of this, so he just kind of goes silent. Bit realizes that he's not gonna say any more on the subject, and taps his fingers on the side of the bed with a clacking noise. Anyways, didn't catch your name. Izuku flinches. Oh, yeah, sorry, my name's Kuroki Hayashi. Sorry. Bit raises an eyebrow. Okay, Kuroki. His eyes lock onto Izuku as he says it, and whatever he's looking for he seems to find. Suddenly, he checks behind himself and leans down, and Izuku freezes as he whispers, "Try and come up with a more believable name if you're gonna lie, though." How? Izuku can't help but squeak, voice strained. Bit laughs. When you've been around, you can recognize fake names. These folks might not be able to, but I do. He leans back, tapping on the rail on the side of Izuku's hospital bed. Izuku's suddenly wondering just exactly who this kid is, and what he's gotten himself is. Although I gotta ask why? Bit adds, snapping him out of his thoughts. Why what? The fake name. Izuku bites his lip, trying to figure out what to say. He doesn't know anything about Bit, and his brain is warning him not to trust the guy, but what else can he do? As long as he keeps it vague, the truth won't hurt. Hopefully. My mom and I don't have a lot of money, and she doesn't know that I'm... He gestures to himself with a bitter huff. I don't want her to have to worry about it. Bit PPS his head slightly. Oh, that'll do it, I guess. So, what did you come up with? He said that I was an orphan. Bit stares at him for a minute, before snorting and shaking his head. Izuku can't help but bristle a bit, but forces it down and settles for raising an unimpressed eyebrow. Bit fixes him with an amused look, resting his hands on the rail of the bed. Ah, the good old orphan trick. What are you gonna do when they try and put you in a home? I'm gonna try and be gone before then. Bit raises an eyebrow so high that Izuku worries that it might float right off of his face. And how are you going to manage that? Izuku opens his mouth to respond, but closes it and slumps a bit, looking away. How is he going to get out of here? He can't just walk out, and he doesn't have any other options. It's not like he can jump out the window. He's really dug his own grave here, hasn't he? That's what I thought. I'll tell you what, Beach Boy. You seem like an interesting kid, so I'll help you out. Bit says. Izuku's head snaps around to look at him just in time to catch the second part. For a price. Of course, he internally sighs, but the offer's too good to refuse. He wonders what the price is. Bit can't ask for money. He knows Izuku doesn't have that. What else could he want? Alright, I'm listening, he says, and Bit lights up. I told you I make stuff out of bits and baubles, right? Izuku nods. Well, most of my materials are junk from that beach. Right now, I'm getting ready to try and start on some bigger projects. However, The things I need are too big for my noodle arms to lug over to my house. He waves his thin arms around to accentuate the point, and Izuku can't help but snicker. He glares, although it's more amused than anything, and finishes, "That's where you come in. You want me to help carry beach junk down to your house?" Izuku summarizes thoughtfully. "What if I'm not strong enough?" "That's for you to figure out," Bit responds. Izuku mulls it over for a minute. He's not weak, exactly, especially when he's using his quirk, but he might not be strong enough to carry some of the bigger pieces. Still, he needs to get out of here before the doctors either put him in foster care or figure out he's not who he says he is, or worse. "I'll do it," Izuku says firmly, despite having no idea how exactly. Bit's face lights up like a kid on Christmas, gray eyes sparkling. "Great," he says a bit too loudly, before wincing and lowering his voice. "How soon do you want to get out of here?" Izuku bites his lip. "As soon as possible, but not before my wounds heal up for the most part." "Oh yeah, forgot about that." "Yeah, me too. It's not like I have a huge-ass band-aid across my entire face." Izuku deadpans without thinking, before jumping and rushing to apologize. To his surprise, Bit is actually laughing. "Oh, I like you," he grins, and Izuku can't help but grin back. "As soon as possible, but not before my wounds heal up for the most part," turns out to be about a week later. Izuku swears it's the slowest week of his life, and he's lost track of all the doctors and nurses that have come through at one time or another. Many of them have had healing quirks and are to thank for his, not exactly speedy but faster than usual recovery. He's been talked to about his past and has explained how he's lived in a back alley somewhere for the past few years, too many times to count. He's getting pretty tired of the act, really. It's been so long since he's acted constantly afraid and wary, and he hates it. Bit visits 3 times, and they're the only relief Izuku has from being Kuroki. He's quick to discover that Bit is very different from basically anyone he's ever interacted with in his life, especially the people at his school. He thinks back to the second time Bit showed up, when he'd been caught in a mumble storm about how the pro-hero Icicle's quirk worked, to the point where he didn't even hear the other boy come in. When he realized that Bit was there, he jolted and apologized, only to trail off when Bit paused from where he was scrawling notes on a sticky note with a pen to prompt Izuku excitedly to keep going. "I can use this. What else do you know?" He'd asked excitedly, and Izuku had slowly but surely trodden back into his explanation of Icicle's quirk and how it affected not the direct temperature of the air, but the vibrations of the atoms around him, meaning that with proper use, he could do far more than just lower temperature. They'd spent the rest of the visit talking about assorted quirks, and Bit had pulled out a few little machines he'd made to show off. With Izuku's understanding of quirk physics and Bit's knowledge of pretty much everything else, he's pretty sure that they'd give any other human being a headache. He'd been hesitant but had carefully revealed his name and details about himself to Bit. In return, he'd learned tidbits of information about Bit's own life and family. "My mom's from Kyoto, and my dad's from Jaipur," he'd said, grinning. "Mom can move metal like a magnet, and Dad can conduct electricity without feeling pain. My quirk's kind of a mix of the two." "What's your quirk then?" Izuku had asked curiously. Bit had clapped his hands together and said, "I'm so glad you asked," even though he probably would have explained it either way. Bit's quirk was called battery, which meant his veins acted as a closed circuit. By tapping into that, he could use his own body as a battery that could power or charge small devices, although it did involve poking things into himself and tired him out. Izuku had gone on to excitedly explain all the uses and limitations that such a quirk could have, while Bit somehow managed to scribble down all of the information he vomited up. Bit had also asked about Izuku's quirk, but he'd just given a quick, abridged answer before moving on. It wasn't technically a lie. Well, it was, but it was the lie he told everyone. "Basilisk," he'd said. "It lets me, grow reptile parts under stress." It was the truth, but it wasn't all of it. Thankfully, Bit had seemed to sense his reluctance to think about it and moved on. Izuku just didn't want to worry about his quirk for a while. He'd seen reports of what had happened on the news, seen the shaky camera recordings of a humanoid creature screaming and attacking the propeller-handed villain. Blade was his name, right, like a horrible beast. He just didn't want to deal with it for now. During the third and last visit yesterday, Bit had given him a small canister that he described as a grappling hook in a Pringles can, and had proceeded to explain how Izuku could grapple out of his third-story window and escape. This feels very James Bond, Izuku had said, examining the capsule in his hands like it might explode. Knowing Bit, even to the minor extent he did, the possibility was rather likely. Bit had shrugged. So what? If I fall and die? He'd asked slowly. Bit had only grinned. Try not to. That's why Izuku's currently peering out the window at the alley far beneath him, clutching the canister in his hands tightly as he gulps. The night is cold, icy wind sweeping in through the open window and sending chills down his back. He's going to have to move fast. Please don't kill me, Bit, he mumbles, zipping up the thin jacket Bit snuck him over his hospital gown and leaning backward out of the window. Once the edge of the roof is in sight, he unscrews the lid of the metal can and presses a hidden button on the side. The force of the hook shooting out of the can very nearly sends him toppling out of the window, and it's nothing short of a miracle that he doesn't fall to his death. A second later, he hears a clatter and feels the line catch as the hook sets. It's all Izuku can do to hope that it doesn't come loose as he slowly leans out of the window, gripping the canister with one hand and the line with the other. His shoulder is still bandaged, but by now he can actually use his hand. Moving it hurts, but he'll have to manage. It's pitch black as he presses a button and the canister slowly lets out more line, buzzing as it and Izuku descend into the darkness of the alleyway. His hands are sweaty and he's shivering, but he keeps his grip on the line as tight as he dares. He sighs with relief as his bare feet touch the cement of the ground. It's cold and gritty against his skin, but he can't find it in himself to care. The Leviathan tries to make itself known, but he crushes it before it can and clicks another button. The spokes on the hook retract, and it whizzes towards the can as the line recoils with astonishing speed. Izuku grunts as the hook hits the inside of the canister with a thunk, the impact making him almost drop the thing. He manages to keep his hold on it and quickly screws on the lid, doing his best to stash the thing in his pocket as he moves to run down the alley. He's shivering by the time he manages to wind his way to the beach without being seen, which involves avoiding streetlights and ducking into alleyways when necessary. The cold is gnawing at him like a pack of rabid dogs, and he's not sure if it's thanks to his reptilian blood. He can hear the crash of the waves and the whistle of the wind when he arrives, the thin paper gown billowing around his legs as he scours the coastline for Bit's lanky figure. All he can make out in the pale blue light is a stretch of sand, glittering white in the moonlight, and piles of garbage that reach towards the sky like jagged mountains. Beach Boy! He hears before he succeeds, and Bit appears in his vision, waving one hand above his head. Izuku tries not to slip as he makes his way across the trash-littered sand, his face splitting into a grin to match Bit's. You made it! Told you that thing would work. How was it? He asks excitedly as Izuku pulls the canister out of his pocket and hands it over. I didn't die, so that should be answer enough, he says, and Bit rolls his eyes and gently cuffs the side of Izuku's head. Come on, smarts, give me something I can work with. He knows what Bit means. He wants constructive criticism, and not it fingscks. Well, he rubs the back of his neck, eyes landing on the canister. When I shot it out, it almost knocked me clean out the window, so something to negate the kick a bit. Got it, Bit says, examining the device with an impressive amount of scrutiny. Anything else? Can I ask why you made a grappling hook out of a Pringles can? Bit shrugs in response, fiddling with a screw that Izuku hadn't noticed before. Why not, you know? That's not, he starts but shakes his head. More often than not, Bit just does things because. Besides, the thing did get him out of the hospital and away from whatever bills and questions he couldn't afford. Thank you. No need to thank me, Bit says, winking. I held up my half of the deal. Now it's your turn. Izuku's mood drops and he looks around the beach. So much garbage. Heaping tons of it. It's also the dead of night, and he's shivering and worn to the bone by his escape through the city. Right now? Yup. Bit says with a cheeky grin, and Izuku goes to give some sort of protest when he's abruptly cut off. I'm kidding, Beach Boy. Midnight and you're in a paper gown. Izuku must have let his relief show on his face because Bit snorts and nudges him with one hand. Come on, did you seriously think I was gonna make you shovel sandy trash in the middle of the night? Izuku shrugs and Bit shakes his head. You are unbelievable, have I told you that? He says, and Izuku gives him an amused look. Yeah. A lot. Can't stop the truth. Bit shrugs and heads away from the water's edge, beckoning. Izuku stays where he is, frozen in confusion. Bit turns around after a few seconds, looking at him strangely. Come on. What are you waiting for? I'm just going home. You're coming to my place. Not the answer he was expecting. This wasn't something they discussed. Bit had said that he would get Izuku out of the hospital and meet him at the beach. Izuku had assumed he'd just walk home from there. What? Why? He stutters before swallowing his confusion and attempting to portray it through a facial expression. Bit turns back to him, crossing his arms, and his telltale grin is a dead giveaway that he's already thought through some possibility that Izuku hasn't even considered yet. It's not that Izuku isn't smart, he can analyze quirks and come up with plans in seconds. But escaping a hospital and getting home unnoticed isn't exactly in his area of expertise. He's a bit curious as to why it seems to be Bit's. You're going through all of this trouble to make sure no one knows you were at the hospital, right? Bit asks. Yeah. What happens when you show up to your house in a hospital gown? As if to accentuate the point, Bit gestures to the pale blue paper gown that's currently billowing around his knees. I can get you clean clothes and a shower, Bit continues. It'll be like you were never there. Izuku has to admit that he's right, as usual. Are you sure? He can't help but ask. Bit snorts. Would I have said it if I didn't mean it? Izuku doesn't exactly have the answer to that, but he takes it as a yes. But if you insist, he answers meekly, and Bit rolls his eyes and huffs. Now let's get going. If my friend gets hypothermia and dies on my watch, well, then that wouldn't be good. Izuku's too startled by the fact that Bit referred to them as friends to laugh at the wording of that statement, and he only realizes that there's a pair of jagged, blue-green fins peeking out of his hair when Bit starts snickering at him. Shaking his head and ignoring the way his fins flare out, refusing to be hidden, he crosses across the sand and takes his place at Bit's side. They fall into light-hearted conversation as Bit guides them through the city, laughing and talking about obscure quirk-related things that most people probably wouldn't consider a conversation topic. It doesn't feel like Izuku's only known Bit for a little over a week. His presence at Izuku's side just feels natural, in a way he can't describe. Bit guides him in the opposite direction of his own house, strolling down the streets with his hands in his pockets like walking down the street in the middle of the night with a scarred kid in a hospital gown is the most natural thing in the world. Izuku takes advantage of the situation to memorize the route he'll probably have to cart trash along, taking notes on the buildings around him and the turns they take. Bit's quiet humming helps soothe his nerves a bit, even after he realizes it's All-Star. Got stuck in my head, okay? Bit shrieks upon being called out, ignoring Izuku when he points out that the song is centuries old. Bit's house is thankfully pretty close. It's a house, which is pretty impressive in its own regard, even if it looks the same as every other building in the area. Bit bounces up the porch steps and opens the door as the light switches on, most likely motion-activated. He raises an eyebrow at Izuku, who lingers hesitantly in front of the steps. You coming? Your parents, will they mind? Izuku asks, painfully aware of the way his fins flatten themselves against his head. He settles for internally scowling and trying to squish down whatever emotion is causing it. Bit shrugs. I doubt they're awake. Even if they are, don't worry about it. They know about you. Do they know you broke me out of a hospital? Not exactly, but they know you're my friend who got hurt somehow. They won't mind you, trust me. Izuku waits for a second longer, but at Bit's insistence, he heads up the steps and into the house. It leads into a narrow hallway, with pale yellow walls and cold floorboards lit by a single flickering bulb fastened into the ceiling. He looks around, taking it all in as Bit leads him down the hall to a slightly ajar door, pushing it open and stepping in without a sound. He flicks on the light, and Izuku flinches as he's temporarily blinded by the sudden brightness. By the time his eyes have adjusted, Bit is already digging through the dresser on the far side of the room. It's not exactly a huge distance. The room is rather small, covered in blueprints and posters of assorted bands. The bed in the far corner is mostly unkempt, and Izuku can make out an array of wires and metal scraps scattered haphazardly across it. His bare feet curl into soft carpet, and he looks down. The floor is blanketed with thin white carpet, populated by an assortment of metal springs and wires. He takes special care not to step on them, backing up carefully. His attention travels up to the ceiling, and that's when he notices how the room is lit. Instead of a normal light, the room is illuminated by a strange pattern of glowing wires that zigzag out from the center of the ceiling in strange, rune-like patterns. He's about to ask about it when he catches motion out of the corner of his eye. He barely snaps out of his stupor in time to catch the clothes that Bit throws at him, which otherwise would have hit him in the face. Bathroom's behind you if you want to shower. If not, there's something to get you out of the paper dress, Bit says, collapsing onto the bed and sending a small clutter of electronic parts bouncing to the floor. Izuku looks up at Bit, then down at the clothes again. Are you sure? Yep. Get dressed. I get cold just looking at you. Izuku can't help but huff at that and goes into the bathroom to change. Showering doesn't feel right. He can do that when he gets home, so he settles for just changing. Bit's clothes are a touch big on him. The sweatpants are bunched up around the ankles and the shirt hangs loosely over his shoulders, but they're infinitely better than the hospital gown, which goes into the trash can. He does rinse his face off in the sink, rubbing his hands over his eyes and sighing. Curiously, his eyes flit up to the mirror. It's the first time he's seen himself, he realizes. His eyes latch onto his own face, and he's struck by how different he looks. He's still freckled and wiry, with weird proportions and green hair that won't stay down, but now there's a line of pale skin that crosses his face. It's stark, contrasting vividly against his tan skin and dark eye bags like a warning sign. He wipes his face off and heads out of the bathroom, tying the jacket he'd been wearing during the escape around his waist. When he gets out, Bit has moved to the floor and is lying spread-eagled with his legs tangled in his bed sheets. Izuku stands there for a moment, not entirely sure how to react. Thankfully, Bit spots him and scrambles to his feet. How are those working for you? Bit asks once he's standing again, fixing his shirt. Izuku rubs the back of his neck, laughing awkwardly. They're a bit big, he offers. Bit snorts. Well, it would make sense seeing as you're 4'4". 4.5. 5'4", Izuku answers defensively, although he can't help but somewhat mirror Bit's grin. Well, are you ready to go? Bit says, deftly changing the topic. Izuku nods, tangling his fingers in the fabric of the shirt. It's a soft cotton, and even if he feels a bit awkward wearing it, it's much warmer than what he was wearing before. Bit flicks the lights off, and Izuku glances up just in time to watch the light of the glowing pattern on the ceiling retract until it's nothing more than a glowing speck in the center. What is that? He asks as he follows Bit back outside. The light thing. Bit grins and claps his hands in the way that proves he's just been waiting for Izuku to ask, skipping onto the sidewalk and launching into an elaborate explanation that takes up half of the walk to Izuku's house. After that, discussion tapers off into a comfortable silence. Bit isn't humming All-Star anymore, for better or worse, so the only noise is their footsteps on the pavement and the whoosh of passing cars. That is, until Bit says, You know, you never did tell me what happened to you. Izuku pauses, fins flaring open a tad as he turns to look at Bit. What? How you ended up on the beach? You know, half dead. Izuku hesitates, fins folding up like paper fans. He knows he can tell the truth, but he's not sure how much of it. If he tries to flat out lie, Bit will probably be able to tell. But he can't tell him the truth. His mind, ever helpful, offers him a vivid picture of Bit's cheery face contorted in horror as the word Leviathan leaves his lips. He decides to offer the same story as he did to the hospital people. Well, it was a villain attack, he starts. He had blades, helicopter blades instead of hands, and he was trying to get me to go with him, but he laughs mirthlessly. I did something really stupid, and he decided that I was going to pay for it. The last part's not technically a lie, letting the Leviathan loose was the stupidest thing he possibly could have done. It's nothing less than a miracle that it didn't completely take over him and kill a bunch of people. Nonetheless, he knows that he couldn't possibly have prevented it. The Leviathan saw the man, reared forth, and Izuku had been powerless to stop it. The thought terrifies him. Or, at least, it would, had he not suppressed it a long time ago. It was a one-time scenario, and the Blade Man is in jail now. He won't lose control again. At least, that's what he tells himself. Bit stares at him thoughtfully, storm-gray eyes glinting in the yellow glow of the streetlights. Izuku's sure he's going to point out a flaw in his story, some facet of his lie that he didn't think through, but he just says, huh. And that's that. They arrive at Izuku's building shortly after that. He peers up at the dim apartment building, searching for the window that he knows belongs to him. He finds it with ease, having memorized it a long time ago. Through the curtains, he can make out a dim glow, which means his mom is still up. There's no putting that off. He'll have to face her and have some sort of alibi ready. So, what are you gonna tell your mom? Bit asks, standing under a streetlight next to him. His hair is waving in the light breeze, tinted with a golden glow. Izuku's shoulders slump, and he chews his lip. Izuku subconsciously reaches up to trace the space where the slash had been, trailing his fingers across his face. He's lucky to have both eyes, but it'll be impossible to hide it from anyone, let alone his mother. What will he say? Want me to go up with you? Bit asks. Why? She'll want to know where you were for the last week or so, right? Probably. Then say you were at my place. It's a pretty solid alibi, actually, but it brings forth a question that Izuku's been meaning to ask. How do you just know all of this? Bit stops to look at him, ping his head ever so slightly and sending a gentle ripple through his silvery hair. What do you mean? It's like you've thought of everything, and you could tell when I was lying and… Izuku trails off, wringing his hands awkwardly. It's been bugging him the whole time, but he's never really thought about asking it. To his surprise, Bit only laughs. I tend to overthink stuff, which can be both a blessing and a curse. Izuku may not be on Bit's level exactly, but he's been lying for the better part of his life. Lying about what he is, about what he can do. Maybe it's for that reason that he gets the feeling that Bit's not telling him the entire truth. But Bit didn't question him further about his quirk, so he returns the favor and says nothing. As for the scar, I'm not sure, Mito, Bit continues before pausing. You mind if I call you that? I know we just met, but dash. No, it's fine. Mito. A nickname that's not meant to hurt. Bit doesn't want to hurt him. At least, until he figures out what Izuku is. He's hidden it from everyone this long. One more person isn't going to make a difference. I don't know. I'll say I got attacked by a villain, and even if it means she'll never let me go outside again, she won't question me too extensively. Bit snorts. If you never go outside again, how are you gonna help me lug trash around? Izuku raises an eyebrow. Well, since my friend was so kind and let me stay at his house for a week and a half, I'm gonna help him with a project. He immediately locks up as soon as the words are out of his mouth. He'd called Bit his friend. Last time he'd done that, the kid had run away from him as Kakin had blasted a hole through the front of his shirt. But Bit isn't like Kakin, not in the slightest, and he leans back with an impressed grin. That'll do it. Anything else we need to figure out? Izuku thinks for a second, before shaking his head. I think that's it. Then he looks straight ahead, ignoring the ripple that shoots through his crest fins. Thanks. Bit blinks at him, before laughing and shaking his head. I already told you you don't dash. Not just for getting me out of the hospital. Just for all of this. He chews his lip and looks at the taller boy out of the corner of his eye. And for being my friend. Bit stares at him, and for a second Izuku's positive he's going to scoff and say, I'm not your friend, but he only rolls his eyes and rakes a hand through Izuku's hair. Izuku squeaks and steps back, but Bit ignores him and laughs. You absolute sap. Come on, let's get this over with. With that, he's dragging Izuku up into the apartment building and opening the door for him with a polite, after you. Izuku sighs and threads his way down the hallway and up a few flights of stairs, coming to a stop in front of the door leading to his apartment a few minutes later. He's hesitant. How will his mom react? Well, he has a pretty good idea, but it's still not certain. He knocks on the door. There's a shuffling and the patter of footsteps, and the door swings open. Izuku's struck by how tired Midoriya Inko looks. Her usual cheery expression has been replaced by something akin to exhaustion, and there are prominent bags under her eyes. Her hair is unkempt, hanging off of her head in loose strands, and her eyes are missing that usual spark that Izuku's so accustomed to seeing. That is, until they land on him. For a second, it's like someone paused time with their quirk. His mom's staring at him, frozen and wide-eyed, and he offers an anxious grin and the weakest of waves. Then it's over, and she's barreling into him and wrapping him up in the tightest hug he's ever had. He's dimly aware of the fact that she's crying, and he presses his face into her shoulder and finally lets himself relax. "Zuku, my baby," she chokes out, before pulling away so she can see his face, chin wobbling. "Where have you been? I've looked everywhere for you. I called the police, but none of them had seen you and, oh my God, what happened to your face?" Izuku, who had formerly been paralyzed under the verbal assault, winces at the last part and wills his mouth to work as his mom traces a feather-light touch across his face. He knows what he looks like, and he wishes he could hide it from her. I got attacked by a villain. On the way home, he stutters out, chewing on his lip. I don't know who they were, but they just appeared suddenly, and then he trails off before his gaze snaps onto Bit, who's smiling at the whole exchange. His mom notices him too, turning hesitantly and shooting glances back at Izuku like she thinks Bit's the villain. He realizes they're both waiting for him to say something. This is Bit. He, helped me and let me stay at his house while I was out of it. It sounded better in his head, but she buys it. You must be Mrs. Midoriya, Bit says, picking up where he left off effortlessly. You've got quite the kid, you know that? It's the right thing to say, and his mom's gaze softens as she chuckles to herself. He's really something, isn't he? Izuku sputters, blushing slightly and attempts to convey betrayal through his gaze. It slides right off, and Bit simply winks. Despite his tactics, it's working. Well, in that case, his mom mumbles. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking care of my son. Well, actually, Izuku jumps in, seizing the moment while he can. Since he went through all the trouble of keeping me alive, I've offered to help him with his project. His mom turns to face him, and he sees Bit snort behind her back and mouth real tactful. He can't react while his mom's focus is on him, but he hopes Bit knows what his reaction would be. What project? His mom asks, a trace of worry slipping into her voice and threatening the precarious setup. Izuku needs to fix that and pronto. At least, this time, he can tell the truth. Well, you know the beach near here? The one that's covered in trash. She nods. Well, Bit uses that trash for parts, and he wants me to help carry it back to his house. She looks pensive, chewing on her lip in the same way Izuku does. When? After school every day. I'll still do my homework, I promise. He gives her a placating smile, hoping she won't try and stop him. She looks hesitant but says, "That if you'll be safe." It's a yes. Thank you. Izuku says, relaxing a bit. He won't be grounded for the next year. Although, he's not sure what grounding would do. It's not like he has any friends that he can, but he does have a friend now, doesn't he? Behind his mom, he sees Bit grinning him and giving him a thumbs up, and he smiles slightly. The night passes quickly after that. His mom invites Bit inside, but he declines and says that he really should be getting home. She then offers to drive, but he once again shakes his head and says that he lives nearby. After Bit leaves, his mom's all over him like a mother bird, asking if he's okay and if he's hurt anywhere else. He's hesitant but shakes his head. Hopefully, he can hide the huge scar on his back. Hopefully. After that, he heads upstairs to shower for the first time in what feels like years. He's in there for at least 30 minutes, scrubbing off whatever dirt, blood, and sand is left over from his escapade and letting the water rinse away his anxiety about the whole thing. What if the doctors come looking for him? What if he has to go to jail for escaping the hospital or lying about his identity? Or He's not going to worry about that. He can't, or he might grow a tail and accidentally knock all of his shampoo over again. So he does what he does best, and as he gets dressed and ready for bed, he crushes his emotions into a tiny ball and tosses them over his shoulder. He's out like a light the second his head hits the pillow. It's been a relatively calm day at the office, which is somewhat of a rarity these days. The police force almost always has their hands full. They might not always be the ones fighting villains, but they are the ones that get to take them into custody and deal with all of the paperwork. So far, there haven't been any villain attacks, at least not in the province that the office Neo Mesa works for is in, so he's relaxing in his office. Well, not exactly relaxing, but the past few weeks have been taxing, and he needs all the rest he can get. There's an impressive variety of papers spread out on his desks, reports, new connections that Blade may have, the mix. He's been poring over them for hours, so he's allowed himself a slight break. Neo Mesa's reading the news on his phone, swiping through story after story when a knock on his door effectively grabs his attention. He straightens up in his chair, turning it to face the doorway and composing his face into one of pleasant interest. He doesn't know who's knocking, but he has a pretty good guess. "Come in," he calls, turning off his phone and setting it on the stack of papers lying not entirely neatly on his desk. The door opens with a creak, and sure enough, it's the intern working under Sansa who's stopped by a few times already today. "Mr. Himura," Neo Mesa greets. The intern, a young man in his very early 20s with dull brown hair and an X-ray quirk, looks a bit unsteady. He's clutching a manila folder with a few papers sticking out and chewing on his lip anxiously. "Hello, Detective Neo Mesa. Sansa sent me with a report on the Leviathan, I think." Neo Mesa, who had expecting information on a newer villain going by arachnophobia, sits up, interested. Himura shuffles forward to hand him the folder, which he sets on his desk with a soft smile. "Thank you, Mr. Himura," he says, and the intern nods jerkily. "Why, you're welcome, sir." With that, he's gone. Neo Mesa can't help but frown. Most new interns are a bit awkward, but Himura seems especially skittish. He has no problem fulfilling tasks, but his interactions are, but to say the least. He'd asked Sansa after running into the officer at the coffee machine, "Neo Mesa, please. What is that, your third cup today?" But he hadn't gotten any answers. Sansa was just as perplexed as he was and said that he would look into it. Still, Neo Mesa knows Sansa's busy. He's been called into some case regarding a child escaping a hospital, or something of the like. It sounds almost too strange to be true, but Neo Mesa's long since stopped questioning what happens when quirks are involved. Neo Mesa decides not to mull over it too much and turns to the folder, a mixture of concern and curiosity swirling in his head. It's light. There isn't much inside, which doesn't exactly come as a surprise. Nonetheless, it's more than they had before. He opens it to a report and skims it almost instinctively. The paper states that, using what little footage and eyewitness accounts that exist regarding the Leviathan, experts have identified it as some sort of transformative type quirk not before documented. It's supposedly reptilian in nature, although this, like most other information, is unconfirmable. Neo Mesa's already seen most of this information before. It's all they've had for the past 10 or so years. He's stared at it over and over on those long nights when he can't push the Leviathan's green eyes out of his head. Neo Mesa's seen a lot of things, many of which would make most men cower in fear, but he doesn't think he'll ever be able to forget the events of that night. His eyes settle on a paragraph devoted to the Leviathan's supposed relations with Daigo Yatsuhiro, better known as the recently apprehended villain Blade, and he dives back into the paper with renewed interest. Neo Mesa's seen Blade a few times throughout his career, and almost all of them have been related to hostage situations. Blade seems to have a thing for taking hostages. It's morbidly interesting. After how disastrously the villain's first hostage attempt went, Neo Mesa had assumed that he wouldn't have to worry about any more hostage situations. To his surprise, that seemed to be all Blade did. Even more surprising, he was pretty damn good at it too, considering he hadn't been caught until now. He'd even taken to calling Neo Mesa by name whenever the detective had the misfortune of being sent to deal with him, which was both concerning and somewhat amusing. What concerns him, though, is the knowledge that Blade has something to do with the Leviathan. Before, Naomasa could have chalked up the Leviathan's appearance at Blade's debut to sheer coincidence. Now, the evidence is indisputable. The Leviathan has only appeared twice, and both times have been related to Blade. Blade, the paper states, has been confirmed to be 28-year-old Daigo Yatsuhiro, who reportedly disappeared 11 years prior at the age of 17. Naomasa blinks, realizing that at the time of the incident, Daigo had been only 18, before he continues. An interview had been conducted in which Daigo was questioned for intelligence regarding the Leviathan's identity or his relations to it. Daigo had expressed distinct anger at the mention of it and had rebuked it, refusing any and all connection to it. He'd said that he had no idea who or what it was, only that it liked me with him. There's a transcript of the interview beneath, and Naomasa's genuinely surprised and almost in awe of the amount of language that Blade uses when talking about the Leviathan. He knew they certainly weren't friends, but he schemes the interview, finding nothing truly helpful, before setting the report aside and looking through the rest of the folder. It's a mix of incredibly blurry, low-quality pictures, transcripts of eyewitness accounts, and the other shreds of information they have on the Leviathan. Naomasa sighs, staring at the paper and rubbing his forehead. It's not much, but it's better than what they had before. His mind can't help but wander, and he thinks about the Leviathan screaming as it slashes Daigo's neck. He wonders who the Leviathan is when it's not wreaking havoc, if there even is anyone beneath the scales and bloodstains at all. Izuku announces in between wheezes, legs wobbling beneath the weight of the rusty engine gripped in his arms. Ahead of him, Bit snorts, hefting an only semi-destroyed microwave beneath one arm. Come on, Mito, we're almost there. I regret ever agreeing to this, Izuku groans. His legs are oddly cold, either from exertion or the layer of dark green scales coating them like armor. Normally he'd be far more concerned about the Leviathan's vice-like grip on his legs, but its strength is the only thing keeping him from being crushed at the moment, so he grits his teeth and ignores it. It's a chilly afternoon, not nearly as cold as the night Izuku stumbled half-bleeding down the beach, but cold enough for the breeze to slip through Izuku's uniform and prick his skin. Even if he's shivering a bit, he can't help but be thankful for it. It makes the bruises on his face and arms hurt a little bit less. Turns out Kaken hadn't been too thrilled about Izuku's return, not exactly the epitome of surprising, but still painful. He'd wanted to know everything, the scar, where Izuku had been, the whole spiel. Izuku hadn't answered him and had unsurprisingly paid the price. He'd ended up battered and exhausted by the time he'd made his way to the beach, even if he wouldn't tell Bit why. Now, Bit is having him haul an entire car engine all the way down to his house, which is a good 10-minute walk when he isn't hindered by slippery car parts. Izuku knows it could be worse. There aren't many people around to gawk at his oil-spattered arms or definitely not human legs, and he certainly didn't miss the way Bit was eyeing the rusty refrigerator back at the beach with longing, but he still feels closer to death than he's ever been. Other than the time he literally almost bled out, of course. He almost stumbles over a crack in the pavement and hefts the engine with a grunt, trying to keep it from slipping out of his hands. What do you need this for anyway? He asks, doing his best to catch up to Bit without falling over. Ahead of him, Bit ponders for a second before answering. Multi-purpose drone. What would you need a multi-purpose drone for? Bit shrugs and continues onward. You never know, he says as if that's an ample explanation. Izuku's whole body feels like it's on fire, but he keeps walking. According to Bit, it's only a little while more, and if he wants to be a hero and make up for what he did, he'll have to work harder than this. He feels the Leviathan churn inside of him and the scrape of claws on the inside of his shoes, and he moves a little bit faster. Izuku almost cries in relief when Bit says, "Here we are." He doesn't trust himself to put the engine down, seeing as he might not be able to pick it up again, so he just awkwardly wobbles behind Bit as he opens the door. To his surprise, the door opens to not an empty hallway, but a person. It's a woman, tall and thin, much like Bit himself, with long, gleaming hair that looks like it's made out of strands of pure silver. Her eyeliner is sharp enough to kill a man, and her sharp face is turned into a frown. "What in the dash?" she starts to say, but stops when her eyes land on Izuku. Her voice is sharp, with an air of power to it, and Izuku would probably be impressed if he wasn't in the process of being crushed into the ground by the weight of a rusty engine. "Hi, Mom," Bit chirps, waving with his free hand. "This is Izuku. He's helping me get parts." Izuku can't exactly wave, but he stutters out a strained, hello. He's never exactly met with anyone's parents before, other than Kaken's mom, once or twice. He's not sure what he's supposed to say. Mrs. Okayawada stares at them for a second, before rubbing her face with one hand and shaking her head. "You must be the Midoriya kid," she says, and Izuku nods awkwardly, not sure if that's good or bad. Mrs. Okayawada glances at him with a raised eyebrow before sighing. "Good Lord, Aki, what have you roped this poor boy into?" She steps aside to let them pass into the house. Bit bounces in, leaving Izuku to stumble into the doorway and try to keep the engine from drizzling oil all over the floor. "This way," Bit calls from down the hallway, and Izuku turns the corner just in time to see him open a door and trot down a flight of stairs. Fantastic. Izuku's too focused on just getting to the staircase to notice Mrs. Okayawada's steps behind him until there's a thin hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "I'm sorry about him," she says quietly. "He can be a bit overbearing." "No, it's fine," Izuku says, shifting his grip a bit and preparing to hopefully not fall down the stairs. "He's great actually." Mrs. Okayawada breathes a laugh, and out of the corner of his eye, Izuku can see her shake her head. "Are you sure you've got that? It looks heavy," she asks, and Izuku swears he sees her hair glow slightly. It must be related to her quirk, magnetism, right? I got it," Izuku answers. "I carried it this far. I'm not giving up now." This earns him a more open laugh, and Mrs. Okayawada disappears from view. Distraction gone, Izuku begins to make his way down the stairs. It's slow going, every step makes his legs burn like they're being doused in Pro-Hero Endeavor's fire, and he's doing his best not to fall. He feels his pants shift, and a second later, there's a thin, fin-tip tail coiling around the handrail. He's almost thankful, but he immediately reminds himself that it's a tail responsible for at least 4 deaths. But he can't force it away because then he'll fall down the stairs. He settles for attempting to push down the part of the Leviathan that's giving his tail its telltale fins. Without those, it's just an inconspicuous lizard tail. To his surprise, the tail obliges, and the fins flatten themselves against his scales and vanish. Izuku pauses for a second, confusion almost overthrowing his thin veneer of control before he focuses and returns to his task. What feels like 10 minutes later, Izuku's standing on the basement floor, breathing heavily. Behind him, his tail swishes across the floor in tired arcs, rubbing across. What must be tile? "Over here," Bit calls from the far side of the room, gesturing to an empty spot on the cluttered work table in the center of the room. Izuku makes his way over and, with a solid thunk, sets the engine down. Bit laughs at him when he sighs and rubs his arms, exhausted. The fire in his limbs has tapered off into a dry numbness, and he leans against the wall. "Nice tail," he hears Bit comment, a note of surprise in his voice, but he's too tired to respond. Something inside him twists at the thought, and he crushes it down. Yet the feelings in his gut linger, swirling around like storm clouds, so he inhales and blows them away. With them, the Leviathan's scales fade away until he's just his regular, human self. Bit's basement isn't that different from his room, really, except even more futuristic looking if that's possible. Every inch of the walls is painted navy blue and covered with tools or shelves, save for the one across from the entrance, which is covered almost entirely in a glowing holographic screen. Izuku's impressed until he realizes it's displaying Bit's Netflix history, which consists mostly of the latest sci-fi movies and the Power Rangers series. The shelves are home to a variety of devices, both finished and not, as well as spools of red and black wires. There's more than one case of a device looking like it's about to fall onto the floor, teetering over the side haphazardly. It makes Izuku a little bit uncomfortable. The ceiling is lit by a sprawling tangle of lights, blanketing the room in a warm glow. It almost resembles some kind of glowing spiderweb weighed down by glowing specks of dew. It's not quite as spectacular as the creation lighting Bit's room, but it's certainly something to look at. Well, not directly at, Izuku thinks, rubbing his stinging eyes. The table in the center is barely visible under the array of blueprints and spare parts covering it, but it appears to be made of some sort of sturdy metal. Out of the corner of his eye, Izuku spots the infamous Pringles grappling gun lying on its side amidst a pile of bolts. I think this'll be enough to power it, Bit says, inspecting the engine curiously. It's oozing thick, dark oil all over the table, but if Bit notices, he doesn't care. Great, Izuku deadpants, slumping against the wall. Bit pokes at the engine for a little while longer, before stretching and springing back over to the door. Come on, don't just sit there, we gotta go. Izuku, who has by now curled up into a slumped mess on the floor, looks up and raises an eyebrow, stepping on the dread rising in his stomach. Go where? Bit shoots him a wink, and Izuku has a feeling he already knows the answer. To get more supplies, of course. Izuku buries his head in his hands and groans. Bit laughs. From there, Izuku's life falls into a simple pattern. He wakes up, goes to school, runs from or gets beat up by Katsuki and friends, lugs trash around with Bit, studies and does his homework, and goes to bed. As tiring it is, Izuku wouldn't go back to his former life for the world. 8 months have passed, and even if Izuku occasionally can't feel his legs, there's no denying the improvement he's made. At first, he'd been forced to loosen his grip on the Leviathan to haul the trash around, but now, he can do it on his own. He can drag fridges through the sand, heft engines with ease, and hold a light-hearted conversation, all without the Leviathan. It gives him a sense of control that he hadn't had before, and it's great. Even better than that, he's not alone anymore. At the moment, he's collapsed in one of the beanbags living in the corner of the basement, trying to breathe in between fits of laughter as Bit jumps up and down on the work table, clutching a microphone made of scraps in one hand. Bit's custom speakers are cranked up to the max, and Izuku can feel the music pounding in the walls. Bit pauses to catch his breath, and Izuku takes the opportunity to yell, "Hit it, Fergie!" Immediately, Bit flawlessly launches back into his rendition of Fergalicious, yelling the lyrics at the top of his lungs as Izuku howls with laughter. He's not sure how exactly Bit hasn't crushed any of the appliances on the table yet, but it's the funniest thing he's ever seen, so he's not going to stop him. Someone else, however, the music is loud, but Mrs. Okaioda is louder, and Izuku almost falls out of the beanbag when she yells, "Aki, other people have ears." Bit looks offended on a personal level and turns the music down until it's what a normal person might consider loud. Izuku makes eye contact with him for a second before falling right back into uncontrollable laughter, ignoring Bit's indignant shriek. "I'm glad my misfortune is funny to someone," Bit says flatly, although there's no actual malice behind it, and he's doing his best not to grin. "How?" Izuku starts, but has to take a second to breathe. "How do you know all the words to that? Are you implying that you don't know all of the words to Fergalicious?" Bit gasps, slapping one hand across his chest in mock horror. Certainly not to that degree. A shame, Mito. A shame. It's 200 years old, Bit. No excuses. Bit yells. Izuku rolls his eyes and slumps further into the beanbag. He's about to close his eyes before he catches a telltale shuffling sound and hears Bit shriek, "For Fergie!" He opens his eyes just in time to be nailed in the face by a pillow. A year ago, Izuku spent his Friday nights curled up in his room, alone, nursing bruises and burn marks and looking up reports of heroes on his phone. He'd stay in his room, alone and silent, writing until his hands ached and he drifted off into restless. Now, he's yelling a war cry as he chases Bit around the cluttered basement, wielding a couch pillow like a bat while Bit tries desperately to escape and laughs his butt off. Izuku isn't thinking about the Leviathan, or what he is. He's not thinking of Bakugu or his insults, or of his classmates' jeers. He's just alive and it feels good. Katsuki notices the change. It's absolutely bizarre. Ever since stupid Deku got that ugly FING scar that he won't talk about, he's been different. He still flinches when Katsuki slams his desk and tries to get the truth about his uselessness through that thick FING skull, but he doesn't ever cower. He doesn't even look afraid in the slightest. Deku doesn't go straight home anymore either, and the thing about that is that Katsuki can't figure out where he's going. He drills Deku about it almost every day, shouting and blasting him with explosions that make the other kids inch away, but the DMN lizard just shrugs. As if this is all some big game to him, and he's trying to make a fool out of Katsuki. Well, it doesn't matter. He doesn't matter. Katsuki's gonna get into UA, and he's gonna show Deku that DMN dream of his is absolutely stupid. So, Bit says, "Yaha." Izuku's brain immediately starts coming up with things along the lines of, I probably won't make it in, but it doesn't hurt to try, or, what of it? And he has to remind him that he's not with his class. Bit just wants to know. Yeah, Izuku says, rubbing his hands on the cement of the wall beneath him and letting his legs dangle over the side. It's dangerous, but he can't bring himself to care. Bit first brought him to this place months ago. It's a hotel that went out of business years ago and hasn't been repurchased since. It's a huge, empty building on the corner of the street near the beach, and most people don't bother going into it unless they're drug dealers or police sent to investigate. The stairwell, however, remains mostly untouched and presents roof access to those brave enough to climb all 40 stories. It's an undeniable workout, sure, but nothing Izuku can't handle at this point. Bit isn't quite as lucky, but he survives. In exchange for braving the climb, he's presented with a perch above the city that allows him to see Mizudafu spread out for miles on one side and the rippling sea on the other. It allows him a clear vantage point from which he can just watch the world without fear. It's become a sort of safe place, even when he's not with Bit. "How'd you find this place?" he'd asked, and Bit had answered with, "I needed somewhere to test a parachute," and hadn't elaborated at all. It's late, and the city has already begun to light up to fight off the darkness. Neon lights and glowing billboards cast colorful glimmers of light on Izuku's shoes as he sits on the edge of the building, wrapped in the night sky and ambient noise. Bit sits at his side. The silver-haired boy isn't as bold as to let his legs dangle over the side, but he's still resting cross-legged at the edge. "I've heard their entrance exam is hard as hell," Bit says. His glasses glitter in the light like a kaleidoscope, and his wild hair drifts around his face in ghostly wisps. "Makes sense, seeing as it's the top school in the country," Izuku muses, leaning forward to rest his head in his hands. Beneath him, a taxi honks as it passes by, sparking a cacophony of car horns in response. "You've got your sights set on the top?" Bit asks, although it's more of a statement than a question. Izuku hesitates for a second, but he shrugs and tangles a hand in his hair. "Not necessarily. I used to, but..." He coughs and swallows awkwardly. "Now, I just want to be a hero. I want to help people. To make up for what I've done. And getting into UA is the best way to do that," Bit surmises with a raised eyebrow. "What kind of hero are you going to be?" He doesn't ask what kind of hero Izuku wants to be or dreams of being. He asks Izuku what kind of hero he is going to be. It's a simple gesture, but it sends a spark of pride through Izuku's question. Until the Leviathan stirs inside him, and he remembers the weight on his shoulders. Underground, probably, Izuku says. It's something he's thought about a lot. If he's going to be a hero with his quirk, media attention isn't something he really wants. If he can just be a hero and save people pseudo-anonymously, that's what he wants to do. Underground, Bit echoes curiously. There aren't a lot of underground heroes these days. Izuku shrugs again. Not necessarily. They're just not in the spotlight. There's a handful here in Mizudafu, actually. Really? Bit asks, perking up. Like who? Well, there's Blue Light Firebird, Blackjack. He trails off, racking his brain. Eraserhead. Bit offers with the faintest of grins. Izuku snorts. Ah yes, Eraserhead. The favorite. Don't dock him, he's a badass, Bit says defensively, narrowing his eyes. Izuku swats his arm lightly. I never said he wasn't, he's my favorite too dash. I thought that was All Might. Other than All Might, but you've heard me talk about him enough. Bit raises an eyebrow. Is there a limit to how much stuff about Eraserhead I'm allowed to hear? Yeah, Izuku answers with a mischievous grin. Or the government will show up at your house and take your bird. Not present Mike. Bit gasps, and Izuku stifles a snicker. He's known about Bit's incredibly loud cockatiel for months now, but the name still makes him laugh every time. The resemblance is uncanny, Bit had said when asked about it, and though he tried, Izuku couldn't find an objection to that. I don't think they could take him, Bit says thoughtfully after a moment, and Izuku pps his head. What do you mean? I mean, he doesn't have a quirk, he's a bird, but he can be pretty DMN loud. Not quite as loud as the actual present mic, but he's close. So you're implying that your bird could scream loudly enough to chase off government agents? Izuku deadpants. You've met him. Tell me I'm wrong. Izuku doesn't have an answer for that. Yeah. See? Don't underestimate the power of present mic. Bit says, and Izuku rolls his eyes and grins. I'm not, trust me. He's screamed in my ear enough to make a point. That means he likes you, Bit says. Izuku ignores that and leans back a bit, resting the palms of his hands on the cool cement behind him. A wind rolls over his knuckles and through his hair, and his gray scarf flaps in the breeze. Anyways, Bit says. What do you know about the entrance exam? There are two parts to it, I think. One's a written exam, and the other's a practical. Practical? Where you have to show how your quirk can be used, I guess. He's not entirely sure. The UA practical exam is pretty watertight in terms of information getting out, probably so nobody can cheat. As in fighting? Maybe. I've never seen you use your quirk to fight, Bit says. Can you? Shaky footage of the Leviathan lunging and screaming as it slashes at Blade in fury. Why yeah, I think so. He knows he can use the Leviathan as an offense and possibly a defense, but it isn't that simple. He can't just let loose and let the Leviathan take over. Not only would he be captured or killed immediately, he would risk hurting the other examinees. And that's something Izuku won't do. He's lucky there's no solid footage of the incident with Blade. Even after digging around, the best he could find depicted him as a screaming black and green blur. That means no one can recognize him if he just uses parts of his quirk like always. Still, if he goes too far, someone's bound to make the connection. He's gotten better at controlling his quirk, which he's grateful for. He can use a little bit more without risking losing control now too, but he still isn't sure what all the Leviathan is capable of. He's written what he knows down in a journal, actually. Not his hero journals. He's not a hero. Not yet. This journal never leaves his room and stays in a shoebox under his bed. If anyone found it, it wouldn't be good. He'll need to look over it again before the exam. Well, in that case, I don't think you have anything to worry about, Bit says, jolting him out of his thoughts, and Izuku looks up. What? You said you can use your quirk to fight, and I don't think you have to worry about the written exam, so you're all set. I don't think it'll be that simple, but he sighs and turns to Bit, who's watching him with a curious expression. Thanks. Just stating the obvious. Bit shrugs with a grin, and Izuku can't keep the smile off of his face. They turn to the streets below, where blinking lights and noisy cars blend into a painting of the city. The sun has set completely by now, and the sky is a flat expanse of navy blue. The city's glow rises over the horizon like an eternal sunrise, painting the sky with a slightly yellow. It's peaceful, a moment of relief in a busy, dangerous world. And the peace is abruptly shattered by Bit saying, I should build a jetpack. Izuku blinks and looks over at Bit, who's peering down at the streets below with a thoughtful expression. Bit? No, he says, recognizing the face immediately. But think about it. I am, and that's why I'm saying no. If I built a jetpack, we wouldn't have to take the stairs. You're right, because we won't be able to when you end up in the hospital. Have some faith. I had some faith, and then you tried to build a drone out of a car engine that I had to carry. First of all, you agreed to that. Second, what's wrong with the drone? It exploded, Bit. A minor setback. It took out the mailbox. I never liked that mailbox anyway. Izuku can't help the laughter that bubbles up inside him as Bit effectively deflects every criticism directed at his creations, and almost doesn't notice when Bit gets up. Wait, where are you going? Izuku asks, surprised. Bit doesn't turn around, jogging towards the door. Bit? Izuku asks again, inching away from the edge of the building and standing up slowly. Bit opens the roof access door and stops in the doorway, turning around with a sheet-eating grin. To make a jetpack. Bit dash. Izuku starts, but Bit disappears down the stairwell. Izuku, tasked with preventing Bit from blowing up either his garage or himself, sighs, gets up, and sprints after him. In what feels like the time it takes Izuku to blink, the next 2 months pass. The UA entrance exam grows closer and closer, looming over him like an insurmountable mountain, and he busies himself with studying for the written part of it and helping Bit with his latest creations. Before he even realizes it, it's the night before the exam, and he's supposed to have fallen asleep at least 2 hours ago. It's not that he hasn't tried to sleep. There's just an excited buzzing in his chest that seems more than content to keep him awake. It hums loudly, spreading excitement and anxiety throughout him like the tide washing over the sand, and Izuku buries his face in his pillow and wills it away. After a while of tossing and turning restlessly, he gets up and turns on his lamp. If he's going to be awake, he might as well get something. Crossing the room to his desk, he yawns and rubs his eyes as he rummages around in the bottom drawer until his fingers close around an uncharacteristically clean notebook. This notebook is smaller than the others. It could easily fit in his pocket if he ever dared to take it outside. It's pristine. Its moleskine cover is clean and unmarred except for the words, "Quirk Notes," which are scrawled hastily in faded Sharpie. Izuku swallows and sits down in his desk chair, setting the book on his crossed legs and rubbing a hand through his hair as he opens the first page. The notebook he's devoted to his own quirk is rather empty, really. There's just not much to say, other than appearance, lizard, uses, killing people. Still, he's written down what he can. The first few pages are covered in pencil scrawlings of what he can do. Izuku ignores the notes about the Leviathan's abilities and focuses on what he himself can do, which is more or less just manifesting physical attributes. Still, his eyes are drawn to the section under the Leviathan's aspects labeled connections. He's aware of mutations in which a child's quirk is nothing like their parents', but he's never heard of something of this caliber. He'd thought that he was just different until he'd considered it for a bit. His mom's quirk allows her to float small objects towards her, and from what he's seen, the Leviathan levitates instead of walking. On the other hand, his dad's quirk is fire-breathing, but he hasn't seen anything that proves the Leviathan can. He's honestly somewhat thankful. It's a train of thought that's led him to believe that his quirk is a severe mutation of his mom's, albeit in a strange way. Maybe someone on her side of the family has some kind of reptilian quirk? He sighs and moves on. As interesting as it is, it's not important. The next few pages are sketches, a few are accurate, such as scaly hands or fins, but others aren't. There's a vague drawing of a finned, serpentine creature with a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth based only off of a blurry, rain-splattered video he found floating around online. Izuku stares at it for a second before flipping the page hastily. He has to focus on what he can do, not what the Leviathan can do. The most frequent trait that pops up is easily fins, followed by teeth, claws, and other things. He realizes he's never really attempted to purposely use the Leviathan. He's only ever tried to keep it from showing. He doesn't really know if he can. Chewing on his lip, Izuku raises a hand and stares at it. In the dim glow of the lamp, he can make out a perfectly human hand, soft and tanned, with freckles scattered across it like stars and short nails. Breathing slowly, Izuku wraps his other hand around the arm of his chair and squeezes. He'll have to figure this out if he wants to use his quirk for the exam. All his life he's kept himself permanently tense, staying taut and in control. Not physically, exactly. It's difficult to put into words. It's like he's always mentally holding himself together with fraying ropes. It's the only way he can keep the Leviathan from snaking through him, prying control from his tired fingers and wreaking havoc. Now, for the first time, he relaxes a touch. It's not much, he simply releases his hold on his hand ever so slightly. The effect is instantaneous. The Leviathan pours through his hand like a river of magma, blasting through his control and filling his hand with an icy thrashing. He watches, eyes wide, as his hands shift from soft and small to sharp and jagged in an instant, a layer of thick, near-black scales speckled with almost luminescent green dots climbing over his hand like a flood. His fingers itch as his nails curve into obsidian blades, gleaming in the yellow light. He feels the ropes go taut and has to force himself to breathe, flexing his hand, claw experimentally. It's just a claw, he can still control it. Hesitantly, his hands still trembling, he reaches over and scrapes one nail down the side of his desk. It cleaves through the wood with ease, leaving a pale line not unlike the one plastered across his own face. Izuku swallows and grits his teeth, reaching out and tightening his hold on the ropes. He closes the hole he made, breathing carefully as his hand tingles and the Leviathan slowly drains away. Scales fade into his skin, and black nails shrink and flatten out. After a second or two, his hand is back to normal, and the straining against the ropes is gone. Izuku lets out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding and slumps forward, resting his head in his hands. So he can use it. It feels strange, but as long as he doesn't try to manifest too much at once, he should be okay. He hopes the exam doesn't involve fighting people. He knows that if he wants to be a hero, he'll have to use his quirk in that way eventually, but he's not sure if he's ready. Izuku closes the notebook and sets it back in its place, sliding the drawer shut and turning off the lamp. As he settles into bed, he thinks about UA. Even if he makes it in, what would they do if they realized they had the Leviathan as a student? He forces the thought away and closes his eyes, tossing and turning for a while more before drifting off into a thankfully dreamless sleep. Izuku wakes up to his alarm shrieking at him in short intervals, buzzing. Blearily opening his eyes, he yawns and pulls his hands out of the warmth of the blanket, craning his head to stare at the digital clock. It's 6. The exam is in 3 hours. He has half a mind to hit the snooze button and go back to sleep, but then he'll just be tired during the exam. Stretching and liking his chapped lips, he rubs his face and stares up at the ceiling. It's still dark outside. The light from the streetlight is the only thing illuminating his room at the moment, spreading its orange glow over the walls in thin bands. Izuku looks around, his eyes still adjusted to the darkness, before sitting up in bed and sighing. Feelings swirl in his chest like the gentle breeze before a storm, sending a chill up his spine and rousing the Leviathan into struggling. Izuku sweeps them aside as he pulls the covers off of himself, inhaling sharply as the cold pounces on him almost immediately. His toes curl into the icy floorboards, and he ignores the bite in his feet as he turns on the light. He throws on a t-shirt and a paint-splattered pair of sweatpants, opting to go for a jog to wake himself up. Pulling on his sneakers, he checks the weather on his phone. It's unsurprisingly cold out, and he grabs a green hoodie from where it's draped over the back of his chair. His mom is still asleep when he slips out of his room, silently making his way to the cluttered kitchen. Her job is at 7 o'clock on weekdays, and she usually wakes up around 6. He hopes he'll be back in time to see her before the exam, but he can't promise anything. The kitchen is even darker than his room, but he knows his way well enough to not bump into anything. At least, that's what he thinks to himself before promptly walking into the corner of the counter. Now nursing his bruised side with a bitter grimace, Izuku opens the door and steps through. He makes his way down the stairs, trailing his fingers over the beaten walls and humming quietly. It's even colder outside, he realizes as he steps out onto the sidewalk. The city is still dark, but lights are starting to come on and the sky is tinged with a faint purple. Izuku jams his phone into his pocket and zips up his jacket, turning onto the street and breaking into a jog. He knows the path he'll take like the back of his hand, even if it's not a long one. He doesn't want to totally tire himself out before the exam. As Izuku runs, the city rouses itself from a dreary silence. Cars start passing him more frequently, and he passes a few early risers who squint at him like he's out of his mind for going for a run so early in the morning. He ignores them, focusing on the pounding of his feet on the sidewalk and the cold wind sliding through the threads of his jacket. Eventually, Izuku turns off of the sidewalk, and the rough, flat ground turns to uneven sand. He stops, sliding a little as he does, and takes a moment to catch his breath. The beach is thankfully empty, both of people and trash. Izuku surveys it curiously as he reaches down and undoes his laces, icy fingers fumbling awkwardly with the thin string. He takes off his shoes, leaving them in the sand a ways up the beach. The sand is cool and crisp as it slides over his feet, and he leaves a trail of footprints behind him as he trots down to the shore. He wades out into the ocean up to his ankles, shivering at the icy wave that washes over him. The cold water laps at his feet, stained a faint pink by the rising sun. It makes his skin tingle and go numb, but he doesn't care. It feels nice. Izuku sighs and sticks his hands into his pockets, staring out the horizon. A gentle wind sweeps through his hair, sliding green curls into his face, and he smooths it back with one hand. "So," he says, his voice a whisper barely present above the wind. "This is it, huh?" No one answers, simply because there is no one to answer. He's alone except for the seagulls drifting lazily overhead and the occasional passing car. Izuku takes a deep breath as nervousness and fear churn in his gut, and he lets himself think about the thing he's been avoiding focusing on. It's today. The thing he's fantasized about for years, the UA entrance exam, is actually here. He has one chance not to F it up. It doesn't feel real really. Maybe the true panic hasn't set in yet, Izuku thinks somewhat amusedly. He'll be competing against the best of the best to join the best of the best. But he needs the UA reputation if he wants to be an underground. There aren't many, and if he wants to be recognized as one, he'll need the renown that UA offers. A particularly large wave rushes over his feet, drenching the cuffs of his sweatpants and spraying his face with the stinging smell of salt. Izuku shakes his head to clear his thoughts, rubbing at the scales he can feel sprouting under his eyes, and steps back onto the dry sand. The ocean ebbs and flows just beyond him, and for a second he takes solace in the fact that it doesn't care what he is. The ocean has seen him at the lowest of his lows. It's here he found himself the first time it happened, all those years ago, and it's here he awoke the second time. Yet it still washes over his feet and whispers to him like it does any other. Izuku sighs and heads home to get ready for the exam. UA is even more terrifying up close. Izuku has to pause for a moment to take it all in, because holy shit. It's huge, jutting forth from the ground like some great mountain. It glitters and gleams in the sunlight like its windows are made of diamonds, perfectly reflecting the blue sky above, and Izuku can't help but wonder what it looks like inside. If he wants to find out, he'll have to make it that far. Swallowing whatever fear he's feeling, he takes a deep breath and starts walking. There are people all around him, talking and laughing. He can't tell what most of their quirks are, but he knows that he might have to compete against them. The thought makes him slightly sick. He's going to have to use the Leviathan to hurt and destroy things, the thing he's feared doing for most of his life. He's spent so long ignoring it and trying to fend it off that the thought of actually using it just feels wrong. But he'll have to if he wants to become a hero and make up for what he did. Izuku's so caught up in his train of thought he almost doesn't catch the familiar scratching sensation at the inside of his shoes. He glances down, eyebrows dropping as he recognizes the itch of his feet turning into claws, and attempts to find whatever emotion's causing it. This turns out to be a mistake, and Izuku promptly trips over his own feet and hurtles towards a face full of cement and embarrassment. He can't hold back the startled yelp that escapes his throat and squeezes his eyes shut, bracing for impact. It never comes. Izuku slowly opens his eyes and finds himself suspended above the pavement, hovering in place. It feels like gravity has suddenly let go of him, and if someone bumped him, he would just go drifting off into the atmosphere. He's weightless. "Sorry. I didn't mean to use my quirk on you without asking. I just figured it would be bad if you tripped," a voice says, breaking him out of his thoughts, and he blinks as a pair of hands guide him into a standing position. As soon as his shoes touch the ground, gravity returns in a fierce wave, and he almost falls down again. Once he's regained his balance, he turns around to see who helped him. It's a girl, probably his age. She has curly brown hair, which is short-cropped and curling around her face like a halo, and her eyes are practically glowing with excitement. "I'm so nervous," she admits, wringing her hands with an anxious smile. "You probably are too, huh?" Izuku nods quickly, not entirely sure what to say. She smiles and waves a hand, turning to jog towards the gates. "Well, bye. Good luck." Izuku shakes himself out of his stupor just as she passes through the doors, and he's dimly aware of the fact that he never even said thanks. Oops. Izuku shakes his head and ignores the scales prickling around his ears, heading into the building. It's not hard to find the auditorium, mostly because it's more or less the place everyone is going. Izuku follows the student in front of him, a tall boy with dark blue hair and probably some kind of lightning quirk, into the auditorium. It's massive, just like the rest of you, spreading out an unfolding flower. As Izuku gazes on the rows and rows filled to the brim with excited competitors, he's reminded of a coliseum more than anything. He finds a seat near the back next to a short girl whose eyes are hidden by thick black bangs. She turns as he sits down in the desk and looks him up and down. Well, he's not sure exactly what she's doing since her eyes are covered, before turning back to the center of the auditorium. Izuku follows her gaze and spots the stage right as a thin man he's seen a few times in pictures prances up to the microphone like an overly energetic deer. He snags the mic stand with a practiced vigor, leans in close, and screams, "Welcome!" The sheer force of the sound alone almost knocks Izuku out of his seat, and he slams against the wall behind him with a startled cough. All around him, indignant murmuring seeps out of the crowd and hovers above the seats in an annoyed swarm. Izuku blows out a long breath and adjusts his position, rubbing his ringing ears. "Welcome to my live show." The man Izuku knows can only be present mic continues, although the sound is thankfully quieter this time around. "Everybody say hey." This is met with more or less absolute silence, and the girl next to Izuku with the bangs stifles a laugh into her hand. Present mic pauses, waiting for a moment, before realizing that it's hopeless and continuing undeterred. "I've got shivers down my spine too, listeners." He yells as if that's why no one is responding to him, and Izuku raises an eyebrow at the fact that he refers to the real live people he's addressing as listeners, like he's still on his radio show. Technically, they are still listening to him, but that's not exactly how the word is generally used. "All right, examinees. I'm gonna give you the lowdown on how this'll go down. Are you ready?" This is also met with tense silence, which present mic promptly fills by screaming at the top of his lungs. Izuku has a flashback to a similar-looking bird of the same name acting the same exact way and barely muffles his snort. It's gonna get a kick out of this, he knows it. Present mic then launches into a detailed, albeit loud explanation of the test. It goes something like this. They've been sorted into one of 7 testing grounds, at which they'll have 10 minutes to get as many points as possible. Points are obtained by defeating villains, which are large robots with 3 different difficulties and respective point counts. Izuku breathes a sigh of relief, realizing that he's not going to have to fight anyone. "Excuse me, may I ask a question?" Someone a few rows in front of him asks, and Izuku's just as surprised as present mic that someone's actually participating. On the handout, there are clearly 4 types of villains listed. Such an error would be the height of embarrassment for a top-tier National Academy of UA's caliber. Izuku has to take a moment to process all of the professional wording this person just used in the span of 5 seconds, and wonders just who the hell it is. Moreover, the black-haired head that he presumes is the speaker twists around, pointing at someone behind Izuku. Izuku turns to check behind himself curiously, before looking back and realizing quite suddenly that the person is pointing at him. "What's with you?" "Yeah, you curly-haired kid," he says, and Izuku feels every set of eyes in the auditorium shift to settle on him. He instinctively shrinks down in his seat, fighting back the scales trying to clamber up his face and embarrass him further. "Can't you stop laughing for a second? You're distracting," Blackhair accuses, and Izuku's not sure whether to be upset about what's happening or impressed that Blackhair managed to hear him at all. "If you think UA is some pleasure jaunt, then leave this place at once." Blackhair finishes with a glare, and Izuku forces his gaze downwards onto his prickling hands. Sorry," he says, although he knows it's too quiet for Blackhair to hear. The silence of the auditorium is quickly filled with giggling and whispering, and Izuku wishes that Bit had let him die on that beach. Thankfully, present mic rushes to his rescue. "Okay. Thanks for the segue, much appreciated," he says, and Blackhair sits down, evidently satisfied with making Izuku's life hell. Present mic then goes on to explain that there is, in fact, a 4th type of villain, one he calls an arena trap, and insists is worth 0 points. He says it rampages when crowded, and Izuku can't help but think of the Leviathan doing the same. He grimaces and swallows the thought, focusing on what present Mike is implying. A few broader statements follow before the pro hero finishes with, "Now let's move to the main event. Plus Ultra. And may you all suffer gladly the trials to come." Izuku's not sure he likes the way that the statement is worded, but he doesn't think much of it. That is, until he arrives at the replica that might as well be its own self-sufficient city. Izuku feels fins prick at his ears as he takes in the sight, wide-eyed. It's filled with towering buildings, all arranged in a labyrinth reminiscent of the city streets he walks every day. Finding robots to fight in here is going to be an absolute nightmare, he knows it. He hears mumbling among the other contestants and turns to survey them. There's quite a handful that's been assigned to the same testing center he has. No Kaken, thank God, although he suspects that's only because students from the same schools aren't allowed to be in the same center. As he takes in the group, his eyes land on a familiar head of curly brown hair, and he sees the girl who helped him earlier standing a little ways away. She looks focused and determined, and Izuku wishes he could have some of that courage for his own. He's distinctly reminded of the fact that he never thanked her, and trots over to do so. However, hardly a few steps in, he hears footsteps behind him and a hand claps down on his shoulder. Izuku can't keep the Leviathan from scaling all the way up his arm, and he clutches it with his still human hand as he scrambles away, wide-eyed. It's Blackhair. Of course it is. His face is curved into a frown, and he opens his mouth to say something. Izuku recognizes the slight stutter in his speech and the sudden widening of his eyes as they trace the line marring Izuku's face. It's one he's seen a million times before but can never seem to ignore. Blackhair immediately composes himself, face taking on a professional mask. "Who exactly are you?" he says curiously, although it has a dangerous edge to it that reminds Izuku of some of Kaken's taunts. "You didn't come to obstruct your fellow test-takers, did you?" Izuku's not exactly sure how going to talk to someone gave him that idea, but he's distracted by the eyes he feels settle on him once more. Everyone's whispering, looking at him curiously. Izuku realizes with a start that they've all already written him off. Whatever. Nothing he's not used to. Izuku forces his hand to return to normal, turning away from Blackhair without answering and heading towards the start line. Right then, however, his eardrums are blasted by a voice yelling, "And start!" The voice says something else, but it's drowned out by the pounding of footsteps that follows the contestants around him taking off into the maze. Izuku hesitates for a moment before gritting his teeth and following. The city is detailed, he thinks as he follows the other examinees. It's a borderline exact replica of the real one, down to the bushes and lines in the cement. His feet pound on the road in time with the footsteps ahead of him, and he keeps his eyes peeled for robots. He has half a mind to let the Leviathan seep into his legs. He knows doing so would grant him a speed boost that might let him overtake the other contestants. However, he doesn't want to lose control over something so minor. He keeps his legs as they are. Right as he's starting to second-guess himself, he hears an odd grinding noise. It sounds like the scrape of metal against gravel, and he pauses to search for the source of the noise. It immediately reveals itself when, in a cloud of smoke and rubble, a single-pointer robot smashes out of a nearby building and locks its glowing red eye on him. This is it. Here he goes. Swallowing, Izuku focuses and lets the Leviathan pour into his arms, filling them with a writhing, broiling energy. His brain immediately panics, screaming at him out of habit, but for the first time, he ignores it. He trembles as the Leviathan floods through him like a virus, cursing his weakness. He'll have to get used to this if he wants to pass. When he's done, his hands feel like they're made of steel more than bone, and he braces himself as the robot shoots towards him. It's upon him almost immediately, swiping with a metal-plated limb. He jumps backwards, stumbling awkwardly out of range, before lunging forwards with a wild yell. His hand slams into the metal and he digs in his claws. At least, he tries. His claws only slide down the metal with a painful screeching noise, leaving behind white scratches but no actual damage. Izuku has a split second to realize that, to his horror, his quirk is absolutely useless against the robots before the single pointer grabs him by his jacket and hurls him into a nearby building. He hits the wall with a crunch and a pained yell, slumping down and shaking as the robot rounds on him. The Leviathan rushes over him, but he manages to suppress most of it except for his already formed claws and the fins that sprout out of his matted hair. The robot shoots forwards with the screech of tires on asphalt, and he barely has time to cross his scaly arms in front of himself and brace for the hit. It comes, but not in the way he's expecting. Instead of a hulky robotic arm punching him into his next life, he's hit with a shockwave of heat and scrap as the robot explodes in a smoldering flash. Bolts and metal bits hit him in a volley, but most thankfully bounce painlessly off of his scales. Looks like his quirk's useful for something at least. Immediately after, however, a thick sheet hits him, pinning him against the wall and knocking the air out of his lungs. As he struggles, he notices a silhouette in front of him, and he looks up. When the smoke clears, he sees another person standing a ways away from him. They're lanky with long blonde hair, which is swept back into a surprisingly intact hairstyle. Around their waist is a thick belt, studded with a large glass circle that appears to be steaming. "Nice team play there," they announce in an oddly accented voice when they see him staring. "Nevertheless, it seems we shall not cross paths again." Before Izuku even has a chance to respond to that, they're gone, practically skipping away and shining like a glitter palette. Izuku shakes his head and focuses on the task at hand, getting himself out from under the debris. He presses his back against the wall and grits his teeth, pushing with both the strength he obtained from hauling around robot parts and a touch of the Leviathans. His arms burn, but the metal groans and topples away, freeing him from his prison. As Izuku stops to breathe, a mechanical voice announces that he has 6 minutes left. His head snaps up and he freezes. 6 minutes? It's already been 4? What's the point? A traitorous part of his mind whispers. His quirk is useless against the robots. Even if he finds more to fight, he'll just end up getting crushed again and again. Still, Izuku thinks, flexing his claws and pressing against the slowly increasing strain on the ropes. He has to try. It doesn't take long to find the main area. Destroyed robots litter the ground in heaps that remind Izuku of the scrap-covered beach, and still more meet their feet at the hands of the other examinees. He hears some yell out their scores as they strike down another foe. 28 points. 45 points. It's almost ironic, he thinks as he stands there, watching the robots and contestants weave around each other like they're performing some kind of deadly. He, the Leviathan, with a death count beyond measure staining his conscience, can't destroy something when it actually matters. He doesn't know why he's even surprised. Still, he throws himself into the fray again and again. He takes on a three-pointer, breathing ragged and hot against his lips, only to be slammed against the ground and tossed like an unwanted ragdoll. He lunges at another one-pointer, swiping and slashing for all he's worth only to be punched in the gut with enough force that he thinks he hears a rib snap. He's trying his hardest, yet he can't do anything. Izuku can't help the frustrated snarl that escapes him as his teeth sharpen and he feels fins poke at the backs of his arms and legs. The thrashing and churning inside of him is getting stronger. Every time he gets weaker, the Leviathan grows more insistent on leeching away control. He can't let it happen. As he heaves and shakes, pressing his clawed hands into fists with enough force to pierce the leathery skin of his palms, he prepares to dive after another robot. He can't give up. He can't. There's a tremor and then a massive explosion. Izuku and the other contestants freeze and look up in horror as slowly, each movement punctuated by the creak of metal and the groaning of gears, a massive robot emerges from a now-destroyed building. It towers above them like a horrifying Goliath, 8 red eyes glowing like those of a spider about to descend on its prey. Izuku wonders for a split second if this is how the people who saw the Leviathan for the first time felt, and he promptly feels a little bit sick. He wonders why Present Mike never mentioned this robot. It's gotta be worth a ton of points, right? Why wouldn't he? Then he realizes that he did. The towering mechanical monster above him is the zero-pointer. Izuku should have known Yue would do something like this. All around him, the examinees that aren't paralyzed in horror are already running off to find robots worth fighting. Why would they bother with an unkillable one for no points? Izuku swallows, fighting images of a giant, building-destroying creation of hell not unlike this one from his mind, and turns to do the same, fins rippling in determination. That's when he hears it. His fins flick as they're met with a low, pained groan, and he freezes where he is. His head snaps around, eyes scouring the rubble left by the emergence of the zero-pointer for the source of the noise. There, not far from him and not far from the zero-pointer, he spots a small shape. It's the girl who helped him before. She's trapped under a hunk of concrete, shaking and wheezing. Her face is twisted in pain, and she's clawing desperately at the cement beneath her, trying to fight herself free. For a second, Izuku sees himself, pale and bloodied, leaning against the frame of an abandoned car, coughing up his lungs while blood seeps into the sand around him. His choice is made before he ever has the chance to make it. Izuku's brain screams at him as he hurtles past the girl, scales coating his legs and turning his pumping steps into long, leaping strides. He sees her out of the corner of his eye as he sprints towards the zero-pointer. She stops to stare at him, wide-eyed, asking the same question that he himself is wondering. "What the hell are you doing?" Izuku's chest burns as he tears his way across the road, claws scraping against the asphalt where they've split through the ends of his shoes. His ears are ringing, and the Leviathan is twisting and shrieking inside of him in a frenzy, but he doesn't care. He doesn't know what he's doing when he suddenly cuts to the side and throws himself at the nearest building, claws digging into the cracks in the cement as he hauls himself up the wall. He doesn't know what he's doing as he scurries up the side of the building like an annoying insect, sweat dripping down his face in rivers as the zero-pointer takes one giant step towards crushing the nice girl, then another. He doesn't have a clue what he's doing when he presses himself against the building, braces, and then pushes, leaping off of the side of it in one clean arc. For a second, time slows. Izuku sees himself, drifting through the air right in front of the zero-pointer's massive face. His claws are scratched into nubs, and his arms and legs feel like they're made of lead. What grabs his attention, however, is the Leviathan, or rather, lack thereof. There's no straining against him. He's weightless, just like he was when the girl he's fighting so hard to save made him so. It's strange, he spent so long fighting against the Leviathan, cramming it down into a cage and trying to shout over its roar, that he can't remember what it feels like to not. But now, as his limbs feel light as air and the pressure on the back of his mind is gone, he realizes that he never wants this to end. Then there's a feeling. He can't describe it as anything else, really. It's like the liquid form of a whisper, shooting through his veins and filling his head with a single thought that he can't put into words. He knows what to do and how to do it, and at the same time he doesn't. Izuku opens his mouth, meets the eyes of the zero-pointer, and breathes. The burning in his limbs shoots through him, flooding his body with fire and pooling into his throat. From there, it blasts through his mouth and past his teeth in a brilliant beam of white lightning that makes the air around it crackle and pop and cleaves through the head of the zero-pointer like a hot knife through butter. The electricity glows with a radioactive green luminescence that gives Izuku the faintest feeling of déjà vu, and it fills the arena with the booming crash of thunder as it fizzles off into non-existence. Izuku's mind fills with static in a way that feels like someone's pouring a bag of sand into his head, and he's distantly aware of a strange sensation in his throat. What is at first staticky numbness then splits open like a graying cocoon, releasing a tidal wave of pain that sloshes across his face. A distant part of Izuku's mind thinks, well, there's the fire breathing. Then Izuku's falling, slipping through the air like a well-shot arrow, hardly even flailing at all. Above him, he sees the zero-pointer tremble and creak to a stop before exploding in a firework of sparks and metal, scattering bolts and wires every which way and splattering the nearby buildings with debris the size of cars. Izuku, however, is more focused on his mouth. He can't move his lips, but his throat and face are filled with a white-hot pain that fills him like a mold. He tries to scream, but his vocal cords are useless, if there's still anything more than ashes at this point. The Leviathan is back, churning and twisting inside of him, but he can't get himself to focus on it and crush it down. His control is shot, and there's absolutely nothing he can do as he plummets from above towards a gruesome fate as a stain on the street. As the gritty cement rushes up towards him, he squeezes his eyes shut and waits. Instead of an impact, however, there's a whoosh and a solid slap against his cheek. His eyes snap open as the pain races through his face. It's nothing compared to the inferno in his mouth, but it's enough to make him gasp and cough up a few sparks. Then he realizes he's weightless yet again. He spirals through the air, coming to a stop a few inches above the pavement, where he drifts aimlessly. Then it's over, and he falls the last few inches and hits the ground with a crunch. He lays there, wheezing and gasping. Each breath feels like it's made of magma and brimstone, but he forces himself to not stop. He's aware of tears flowing down his face, running over his blackened lips and scorched neck, and there's nothing he can do to stop them. But out of the corner of his eye, he sees the girl staring at him. She's panting and exhausted, but she's okay. She's okay. At least he did something right. Ochako is trapped. The last thing she'd seen was that thing bursting out of the wall in front of her, deadly and menacing, before a hunk of concrete had fallen over her and crushed her like a flimsy piece of cardboard. Now, she can see the same robot slowly stomping towards her, feet growing closer and closer to crushing her. No. She can't die here. She needs to become a hero. No, she needs to stay around for her parents. She can't die here. She won't die here. Ochako groans and screams in frustration as her fingernails scrabble uselessly over the asphalt beneath her. She strains and paints, trying to push herself up, but the cement weighing her down is too heavy and she can barely move it. She tries to twist around her arms and use her quirk, but her hands are pinned in front of her. No matter how she struggles, there's no way she can find a way to touch it. She's desperate as she yells and pushes at it desperately, cursing her own weakness. Why won't it move? Why can't she get up? Then there's a blur of movement just beyond her, and for a split second, Ochako locks eyes with the boy from before. She hadn't thought anything of him when she'd used her quirk to keep him from tripping not an hour ago. He'd just been another person she could help, so she had. Then she'd seen his face, cleaved in two by a thin white mark that contrasted sharply with his dark freckles. Beyond that was a pair of green eyes, deep, like a forest, yet weighed down and pained by something Ochako couldn't understand. She'd known that he hadn't just been anyone, but she'd been so nervous about the test, she'd run off before he could even say a word. Now, though, she knows that he's far more than not just anyone. She can only watch as he tears down the road with inhuman speed, running towards the thing rather than away. But what is he doing? Then he clambers up the wall with breathtaking ease, lunges off of it, and fires a glowing thread of lightning that branches out like a tree straight into the mechanical monster's head. Ochako watches in shock as the robot groans to a stop, no longer in danger of crushing her like a bug, and then explodes in a plume of red and orange light. It sends spots dancing across her vision, and she rubs her eyes with the back of one sweaty wrist before looking up again. Among the debris hitting the ground all around her like meteors, she spots a familiar shape, and gasps when she realizes what it is. It's the boy. He's falling, plummeting towards the ground with no signs of stopping. If he hits the concrete at that speed, he'll die, and nobody can help him. Nobody, that is, except Ochako. She has one chance, and it'll hurt like hell, but she has to. She can't mess this up. As the scarred boy falls towards her like an angel cast into hell, she pulls her hand back and slices it through the air with more force than ever before. It collides with something soft with a resounding smack, and Ochako pours her quirk through the connection and siphons away its gravity with practiced precision. As she pulls her hands away from what she realizes is the boy's cheek, she watches in horror as he continues to fall. No. He stops, coming to a rapid halt a few inches above the ground, coughing up sparks and groaning but very much alive. Ochako breathes a sigh of relief and presses her fingers together, whispering, "Release." Nausea hits her immediately, flowing over her like a sickly tidal wave, and she promptly loses her breakfast all over the cement in front of her. Her whole body is shaking, either from exertion or overuse of her quirk, but she can't find it in herself to care. She wheezes for a moment, swallowing the acidic taste in her mouth, before looking up. The scarred boy is lying on his side on the ground not far from her, shaking and coughing. His back is to her at first, but then he rolls over, and Ochako can see his face. It's horrifying, quite honestly. Ochako doesn't know what lightning or fire-breathing quirks are supposed to look like, but it can't be this. His neck and the lower part of his face are charred black and flaking off, and his face is twisted into what Ochako can only describe as horrific pain. Oh my God, she manages to say over the weight crushing her and the tightness in her own throat. Are you okay? Scarboy doesn't respond, but he looks up, eyes searching desperately. They land on her like searchlights over a dark ocean, and his expression loosens a little bit. Ochako swears he tries to smile, but he can't seem to do it. She tries to speak but can't. The test is over. Present Mike announces suddenly, and Scarboy's face suddenly goes blank. His eyes go wide for a moment before squeezing shut as he curls in on himself with a pained groan. Ochako's vision is then obscured as the other examinees rush over to examine the exploded remains of the giant robot and the charred kid lying on the ground. She can't focus on what they're saying, but their excitement quickly turns to horror when they realize what Scar Kid's quirk has done to him. Is he gonna be okay? What kind of quirk is that? It's crazy powerful, you've gotta give him that. The rest of the replies follow a similar suit as the examinees talk amongst themselves, and a brave few step forward to poke Scar Kid on the shoulder. Ochako wants to yell at them to not do that, but her throat is sealed shut. Eventually, a few students notice her and run over, beckoning the others and shouting. Together, a few of them manage to heft the cement off of her, grunting and groaning all the while. It hits the ground with a solid thunk, and she wheezes a thanks and theres in a few lungfuls of dusty air. Her arms feel like they're made of molten lead, but she's just thankful to be alive. Thankful to someone, to be exact. Ochako half walks, half crawls towards the broken shape of the scarred boy and stops, unsure what exactly to say. Thanks for saving my life? I'm sorry about your face? Thanks, he rasps before she can figure it out, and it takes her a minute to figure out what he said. His voice is absolutely destroyed. No, thank you, she insists before she can overthink it. I would have died if it weren't for you. I'm glad you're okay, he whispers, and his voice is like sandpaper as his eyes squeeze shut in pain. Ochako doesn't know what to do. Should she call an ambulance? Surely UA has something prepared. They do, in the form of a tiny lady in a hero costume, who hobbles towards them out of the crowd. She's wearing a white lab coat, and her gray hair is held up in a tight bun. Part of her face is covered by a translucent purple visor, which she appears to have no trouble seeing through. Go home, lads, I'll take it from here, she says, handing what almost looks like gummies to a few of the nearby examinees, who awkwardly stutter out their thanks. That's Recovery Girl, Ochako hears a nearby examinee whisper excitedly. She's a mainstay here at you, and the reason they can do things like this. Recovery Girl comes to a stop in front of Scar Kid, looking him up and down curiously. Ochako doesn't know what to tell her. Hush, Recovery Girl says, although it's less of a command than a soothing word. He'll be okay. As she leans over Scar Kid, her eyes crease underneath her visor and her expression turns almost concerned. You inflicted this much damage on yourself with your own quirk, huh? She murmurs so quietly Ochako almost doesn't hear it, and then she leans forward and kisses his forehead. Ochako stares in confusion, wondering what's going on, when suddenly Scarboy's skin seems to start glowing. His burnt, cracked skin slowly melts back into a solid mouth and neck, and moments later, it's like nothing ever happened. Scarboy freezes, and his eyes slowly flutter back open. He looks up as one hand slowly reaches up to brush his chin, rubbing over now smooth skin in surprise. He starts to say, but winces as his voice comes out in a gravelly whisper. Recovery Girl tisses and gently baps him on the head with her syringe-shaped walker, shaking her head. I healed you for the most part, but you shouldn't try to talk for a little while. You're lucky to still have your vocal cords, give them a rest. Scarboy looks at the ground and nods, although he looks oddly relieved. Maybe because he's no longer in brutal pain, Ochako thinks. Now you, young lady, Recovery Girl says, and Ochako blinks and looks up right as a pale pair of lips press themselves against her forehead. It's like someone has squeezed the light out of the sun's rays and poured it over her, The pain vanishes like someone rubbed it away with a chalkboard eraser, replaced by soothing relief. The bruises on her back and the cracks in her nails disappear, and Ochako can't help the sigh that escapes her. Recovery Girl chuckles lightly and moves on to other students as Scarboy stands up, although he's wobbly. Ochako follows, hovering hesitantly at his side and unsure whether or not to offer help. "I'm okay," he says when he notices her watching, and his voice is hardly a sandy whisper. Ochako watches the way his face crinkles into a pained smile, and she can't help but think how wrong it looks. Recovery Girl told you not to talk," Ochako says awkwardly. Scarboy rubs the back of his neck sheepishly, but he doesn't try talking again. Ochako's wondering if she should just leave when she realizes that he still doesn't know her name, and he doesn't know hers. "Oh," she blurts, and Scarboy flinches and stares at her, wide-eyed. We never got each other's names." He relaxes a tiny bit, and Ochako can't help but wonder what he thought she was going to say. "I'm Uraraka Ochako," she says with a wave. "You don't have to tell me yours, but dash. Midoriya." He cuts her off, before going wide-eyed and taking a step back. Ochako doesn't bother telling him not to talk again. "Nice to meet you, Midoriya," she says with a smile. "I hope we both make it in." He nods, and Ochako knows that even if she didn't pass the exam, she's done something right today. Ochako's almost to the gate when she overhears one of the boys in her testing area talking to a cluster of people near the wall. She almost doesn't pay any attention to it, but then she hears lightning and destroyed the zero-pointer, and maybe slows down and starts listening a bit more closely. "I feel kind of bad for him, though," the one in her exam is saying. "He destroyed the zero-pointer and saved some girl, but he still didn't get a single point." Ochako's eyes go wide, and she freezes. Midoriya didn't get a single point? How is that possible? He destroyed the zero-pointer with a single hit. How could he not have? She thinks of Midoriya's face, charred and smoking as he cringes and coughs. He couldn't have used the lightning breath before, it's pretty clearly a one-time use. She's still thinking about it when she stops at the gate, entrance ticket still clutched in her sweaty hand. The outside world beckons, telling her to leave the fantasy she's in and return home. Ochako thinks of her 28 points, and how useless they would have been if she was nothing more than a splatter on the bottom of a giant robot's foot, and then she thinks of a boy with no points who sacrificed everything to save her. She turns away from the entrance, striding purposely back into the building. There has to be something she can do.